on it, there were no prints, and there were no tracks leading away from it in any direction. It seems that the only tracks they could find were the ones left by the ATV
Damn.
itself, and those
So
didn't
I
go
lied.
off into the woods or anything.
We're not gonna do the Lego stream because I don't think we have enough time.
Hopefully we can. Let me just get some soda. BRB.
Alright.
They just were to the road. And according to the Knoxville News Sentinel, there was nothing to indicate Mike had ever been there. So the opinion of investigators and journalists here doesn't even seem to be that Mike had gone missing from the abandoned cabin. It was that Mike had never been at the abandoned cabin. But there's another issue with the abandoned cabin. When I asked the cops about it, they didn't know what I was talking about. It took a little bit of back and forth, some emails, a few phone calls, but what I was able to dig up is that despite the fact that Matt was positive, he did not, it wasn't like, I think there was a cabin, there was a cabin sort of nearby, it was that ATV was stashed at an abandoned cabin. Not near an abandoned, at an abandoned cabin. And yet the abandoned cabin was not in the police report.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be
Now, I'm not
suspicious.
too conspiratorial about that because the next day they expanded the search to the entire ridge above Happy Valley Loop on the non-National Park side. And while National Park Service rangers and other deputies were leading searches out in the woods, 3 officials and 14 volunteers on horseback went to where the ATV was found, and they started to fan out and look around there. The fact that they were involving volunteers in the search, even in areas that may have been sensitive regarding the abandoned cabin and the ATV site, leads me to believe that at this point in time, there was nothing that the cops were trying to hide. Also, by this point, they had kind of moved outside of the, alright, well, let's just check the general neighborhood. They were even looking at the caves he had frequented, and not going too deep inside, but peeking around, checking the surrounding areas. They were at this point pretty confident Mike wasn't just going to be found out and about on the surface. He was going to be somewhere in the bush, possibly even in a cave. And considering the location of his ATV, there weren't a ton of great spots that could have been. If he was off in the woods injured somewhere, something bad had happened, because somebody had to have stashed that ATV, and it was not Mike. So the likelihood, the hopes that this was just a simple accident were quickly diminishing. And part of the reason
That's pretty
that
suspicious.
the focus of the search and the way that they were considering this effort, now moving a little bit more towards recovery than rescue, any reasonable person can look at the ATV situation and the ignition switch being on but the keys being off and still in it, and see that that is proof positive of one of two things. Either Mike intended to disappear, or it was foul play. And as far as intentional disappearance goes, that was ruled out by other things, and Matt and Andy were adamant that their father would never abandon his family like that. And as far as I can tell, that tracks. Nobody really anticipated that Mike had any desire to leave his life. He owned a business where his 2 sons worked. He lived close to his family. He was out and about on the weekends, enjoying life. He had property. The guy had displayed no interest in disappearing. He'd also just borrowed his son's lawnmower, and as far as anybody could tell, prior to him disappearing, he was behaving perfectly normally. Foul play just made a lot more sense. Unfortunately, with no developments by Friday afternoon, they suspended the search on August 30th, 2008. And in the years since
What?
Mike's disappearance, while his family has not held out hope that they'll still find him alive somewhere, they have continued searching for answers. And going into researching this case, I was hoping that maybe I could find some where I could at least get in the right direction. Maybe a new, fresh set of eyes, external to the case, might be able to help. Unfortunately, there's just so little publicly available information, and there may just be so little information that it's impossible to come up with a good conclusion as to what could have happened to Mike. But there are theories. His sons still believe that he was a victim of foul play, though precisely what kind is uncertain. Early on, some people speculated on internet forums that maybe developers wanted his property, and this was an easy, convenient way of making him disappear. Now, the
Developers.
fact that making somebody disappear is neither easy nor convenient notwithstanding, in the ensuing decade and a half, His property has not been sold to developers, so it's doubtful that that's what it was. Also, I didn't find
True.
evidence that
This
developers
is
were
true.
trying to get his property after he passed. And while others suggested maybe this was some sort of rivalry, maybe he had enemies who disliked him for some reason, his son said that even in the very competitive home construction business in which they worked, he was well liked by everyone they knew. According to them, their father just had no enemies, and it's possible that they were wrong, but they couldn't even think of somebody who might want to hurt their dad. One possibility is that he came across some illegal activities while he was out riding his ATV, possibly a marijuana farm or an unlicensed moonshine still. And no, I will not be getting into
Moonshine
it with
still.
anybody about what moonshine is, how licensing for moonshine could possibly work, whether licensed moonshine is real moonshine or not. That's not the point of this video. Perhaps if he had done this and was seen, or maybe spoke up and said something to somebody there, he may have been kidnapped or even killed to keep him quiet. And then others still look to the paranormal to explain this disappearance. There was no scent trail on the ATV, and there were no footprints leading away from it, which led some people to believe that maybe Mike was abducted by aliens. Of course, it had been raining for nearly 24 hours straight by the time they got to the ATV, which would likely explain why the dogs could not pick up a scent. Others still suggest Bigfoot, or more appropriately, the Tree Men of eastern Tennessee. And this has
The
gone
Tree
by
Men.
many names. Sometimes they're called the Wild Men of Appalachia, the Tennessee Tree Men, whatever. It changes. The version we're going with here was told to me by Wendigoon. And it was told to me by Wendigoon while we were driving through Great Smoky Mountains National Park, so I felt like this was probably the best folktale to go with. And what I was told is that these guys are tall and they've got patchy hair all over their bodies, and that they live in these secluded, scattered communities throughout the mountains. They're also called tree knockers by some because
Tree
they like
knockers.
trees, but that could also be just when humans are around to avoid any verbalizations. And as for their behavior, would the Tree Men capture this man? Well, in some versions of the stories, they are responsible for bringing lost children back to their families. They take care of them, they make sure they get home safe. And in other versions of the stories, they kidnap children. According to what Wendigoon told me, it really depended on which one of them you ran into. They could be good or bad, much like human beings, much like normal people. So perhaps someone or something so adept in the forest could move around without leaving a noticeable trail. Problem is, I really strongly doubt they could drive an ATV. So that then brings us back to foul play, which in and of itself is still complicated. There's no simple, neat answer here. Whoever took Mike left no prints, foot or finger, but they must have driven the ATV and then turned it off. Yet whoever stashed it either didn't know that you had to hit the kill switch or it would drain the battery, or they had no intention of returning for it. And then there's the weird caginess about where the ATV was found and the abandoned cabin. Now, on the one hand, I get it. This is still considered an open case, and it's department policy to not share sensitive case details with the media. On the other hand, I would have expected there to be more movement or updates in the case if the ATV's location was essential to what was going on, if some sort of criminal activity had been suggested by what they found. And of course, not only is there the fact that the police would not tell me where the ATV was found, but they also said that they had no knowledge of the cabin. So what I really don't get here is why leave the abandoned cabin out of the police report? Matt seemed pretty positive it was there. And why be so cagey about the location of the ATV?
Because plot twist, the cabin has a secret entrance, just like in fucking Kingsman, the Secret Service. There's an old lady waiting when you enter, and you tell her, Oxford's not brogues, and she pulls the lever and brings you down into like the secret, Kingsman facility.
15 years later, and if it's a department policy issue, why is department policy to not give any useful information to people after 15 years? I get it. It might be a sensitive case, there might be something going on there. But also, you have failed for 15 years. Let someone else take a crack at it. It is possible that you just do not have the time, energy, and resources that the rest of us do. I mean, think about it. The police in these cases, they've got to deal with the missing person, but they've also got to deal with responding to other criminal calls. They've got to deal with traffic stuff. There's all sorts of stuff going on for the police. They can't dedicate all of their time and energy to just one missing person. But the collective consciousness of the internet certainly can. So, while I'm not angry at the Blount County Sheriff's Office for how they handled this or how cagey they were about certain information, What I would like to say to law enforcement, if any of you are listening, or if any elected officials who have lawmaking power are listening, hey, maybe set a sunset on keeping a lid on everything. Because if the police haven't solved it after 15 years, pretty confident they're not going to without somebody else's help. One good case here, the boy in the box. Why was he
Boy in the
identified?
box.
Well, he was identified because a completely random person took a DNA test, and then an outside third-party agency flagged it in their system. Sometimes law enforcement needs help, and that's okay, but you gotta let us help you, because without that information...
Wait, what the fuck?
Until today, he's only been known as the boy in the box, a cold case that has stumped investigators for 65 years. An unidentified child found naked and beaten to death in a cardboard box on February 25th, 1957 in Philadelphia.
The fuck?
Now we know. At a press conference today, detectives identified him as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was just 4 years old when he was slain.
In his very short life, it was apparent that this child experienced horrors that no one should ever be subjected to.
Until now, his headstone was poignantly simple. Bless this unknown boy. How, after all these years, were investigators able to identify the boy in the box? The body had been exhumed twice for DNA, but advances in science and technology allowed investigators to gather more critical information that led to the boy's identity.
My role was to take the very badly degraded DNA and try to develop data from it that we could use for genealogy. That took 2.5 years and 3 different tries, and we finally did it.
Now the next mystery. Who could have killed an innocent child? Is there a suspect?
The answer at this time is unfortunately no. We have our suspicions as to who may be responsible, but it would be irresponsible of me to share these suspicions as this remains an active and ongoing criminal investigation.
Hey guys, and welcome back for yet another...
In 1957, the body of a young boy was found discarded.
Alright, so let's finish this one and then.
Without knowing where the ATV was,
Yeah.
there is absolutely nothing I can do further. I am completely at a loss for what happened to Mike next. And you know, maybe they're also at a loss for what happened to Mike next, but they must have tried all of their ideas, so let me have mine. But with almost nothing to go on, there are really only a few possibilities that I see here. And I will say, the ATV makes me very confident that it was not Bigfoot. Whatever happened to him, it must have involved people who were willing to kill to keep a secret. Some have suggested that this was a drug deal gone bad, but there was no evidence that Mike was using drugs. So we can't really be talking about something super minor here. I'm thinking something big and something that in the region would be relatively common, and what comes to mind is, as I said earlier, marijuana farms and moonshine stills. Back in 2008, both of these things were extremely illegal in Tennessee, so somebody who operated one of these farms or stills, if a random guy just drove onto the property and you didn't know where he came from, who he was, or what he would do if he left, you might feel like you had to do something drastic. And to be clear, I'm not justifying what I think happened here, I'm just trying to put you in the mindset of why somebody might kill somebody over something as simple as a moonshine still. In some cases, it might just be that the owners are a little jumpy, but in others, it might be a little bit more calculated. Either way, I feel like what probably happened here was that Mike stumbled across something like this, and maybe exchanged words, or was spotted and tried to get away. I don't know for certain, but it seems like he got a little too close to something that was going on either on his property, on a relative's property, or on a friend's property, or at the very least, very nearby, maybe said something about it, or maybe went to go warn them, got caught, and unfortunately was a victim of violence. Whatever happened here, due to the nature of their industry, they probably knew they couldn't just let the guy go, but they probably also didn't know where his home was, and they couldn't just leave the ATV wherever they got him because it was probably near their stuff, so they had to move it, but they didn't know where to put it, so they put it at an abandoned cabin. They backed it into the trees, hoping nobody would see it, or if they did, it would take a while, or maybe they thought, okay, well, we stashed it at this abandoned cabin, and then we come back for it later. But because they didn't hit the kill switch, the battery was dead, so they had to leave it behind. But without knowing where the ATV was found, I'm kind of stuck from there. Because the important part to note here is that they did not find ATV tracks leading into the woods. The only place the ATV could have come from was the road. And there's only 2 roads in and out of Happy Valley. Both of them are the same road, actually. There's just 2 routes in and out, and one goes south and one goes north. So if this ATV was found just off of Happy Valley Loop, it's probably because whoever did this to Mike knew they could not get out of Happy Valley on the main roads during the day without being seen. So where that thing was along Happy Valley Road is actually a crucial detail to anybody investigating this. And by hiding it, by refusing to share that information with the public, all the sheriff's office is doing is hindering anybody who might try to get answers who actually has the time and the resources. And again, I'm not saying this to harp on the sheriff's department, to call them bad people, anything like that. I think they did their jobs to the best of their ability. The problem is, the best of their ability was not the best of anybody's ability. If this information were made public, I'm not saying that it would solve this case, but it would certainly give people a lot more to work with. And if people had a lot more to work with, they might be able to bring this family some closure about what happened to their father, their son, their brother, their ex-husband. You know, this is...
Yeah, that's
this could
true.
be huge
That thing's
for
worse
this
than
family.
not knowing, you know?
Instead, we're sitting here going, oh, well, maybe it was Bigfoot because the police won't share the information. Usually, I love that I can add something to what's already out there on the internet. I don't feel like I did that here, but I hope I entertained you nonetheless and taught you something about the Mississippian culture, and maybe there...
It was a cool video on the missing 411 Mike Heron. Oh yeah, it's fucking crazy.
The missing 411 case. It's the first one most people hear. It was Father's Day weekend, 1969, walking around the forest with Wendigoon. The Dennis Martin...
Dennis Martin. Wendigoon.
The Dennis Martin case is one of the missing 411's most unexpected.
Oh shit.
From natural explanations like unseen predators to the possibility of supernatural entities beyond our comprehension, nobody's really sure what happened that Father's Day weekend in 1960.
I like how the video is presented already.
Stories, legends, and nightmares of the Dennis Martin disappearance. Also, subscribe to his channel, The Lore Lodge on YouTube. If this video interests you, then you'll love what he's doing over there. Check them out at The Lore Lodge, link in the description. It's this guy right here.
And
check him out, Lore Lodge.
Yeah, it's
This
me.
is good.
Of course, I have to give credit to my videographer and editor, Aidan Thornbury, who couldn't be here with us tonight, but is an integral part of what we did this weekend, as well as what we do every day at the Lore Lodge.
So go subscribe, link in the description, immediately. I'm checking.
So, we are driving
I'm checking.
from
He's checking, guys.
Pennsylvania to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, to
How long is this?
do a video
Oh,
on the
not bad.
disappearance of Dennis Martin in person.
I'm about to go bone
Very
repair soon,
witnessing
chat.
the exact location with Wendigoon. You can get why people were so superstitious about these mountains upon settling. They're enormously beautiful, but at the same time, they're really, really dark. And the mornings they'd sit basically coated in mist half the time. I mean, there's a reason they're called the Great Smokies, but I mean, you
Great
look around and you're
Smokies.
like, okay, I can see why any bump in the night, any twig snapping out of place would probably set somebody off a little bit.
Also, when you get to like a mountaintop around here and like look down, it is insane how many valleys there are. Like the mountains just keep rolling. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Doctor Enough, I will give you my firstborn. Sponsor me somehow. I don't care. Doesn't have to be a lot of money. Just send me a free one. I need to be sponsored for my own principle, please. Was that them? Was that the Doctor Enough?
Doctor Enough.
Okay. You don't have an option.
Drink that.
Ooh, I
What is
know.
it?
That's tasty.
It's
Mhm.
tasty. It's refreshing.
It's tasty.
Just gotta try.
Those are too cold.
That's a two-tone.
And speaking of sponsors, I want to take a moment to thank the people who made today's video possible. The home of audio entertainment, Audible. Audible offers a countless selection of books, podcasts.
I love you, Wendergoon, but
Stories, middle, if you go that's right. And the plus anytime / Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to Audible for sponsoring this video.
más.
Really does mean the most to see you support these crazy ramblings. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. So this is Cade's Cove up here on the left.
Philip has been sent to the Shadow Realm.
To do this, but when we walked up to the park person, don't immediately question him about dead people.
I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to.
Trust you.
I have boundaries.
I don't trust you at all. The Aidens are in the bathroom right now, but I just need everyone to know I'm being held captive. I'm here against my will. They've had
There we go.
talking about missing
Shit.
persons for days now. Someone's hi. Hello. Hi.
Question is, where's north?
That way.
You guys
that
have.
way. Oh. Alright, so if you're from the region, you don't step onto a pile of leaves on the water.
But other than that, very nice.
Very nice. Pensare tutta potato.
This trail's on map, that's cool. It's based. I think we should go to the
What are you, dude, what are you talking about, bro? Dude, Wendigoon looks so like ripped. Looks like Johnny Bravo.
Really? This is like scary bad. This is like grandpa with dementia bad.
I used to be a lot better. How many schools do you think you take?
Do I have a weapon? I feel like this is the trail,
It says
but
do not enter. But
Do you have a weapon? You have Guts' greatsword.
sure this won't come back to hurt us in any way.
It's gonna be fun.
This definitely won't be a testament to our
Testament to our own hubris.
Just went a big circle.
Yeah, but we burned 100 calories.
Go ahead, Lewis and Clark.
What other option do we have?
Lewis and Clark is foul.
Where do you want to go?
I insist. Just tackle this the way you think is best.
That's because you just want to watch me fall in the water again.
Yep.
Tackle this the way you think is best.
I have learned from my experiences, and I will not be falling in the water.
Oh, really? Well,
No,
fuck.
defiant.
I said
That
fuck.
was crossing the
Fuck
water
off,
to you.
Don.
It's that way.
Fuck
you
off,
walked
Don.
on the bank. We're trying to get footage of you falling in.
A lot of dry rocks. Oh, speaking of falling,
We all did it. We're all even now. We found it. Look, we discovered the lost trail
Well, yeah, I mean,
with people
yeah.
dying and
Yes.
411s this way. Yeah.
Russell Field Trail, here we go. Right now, we are following the trail to Russell Field, the Russell Field Trail, also part of the Anthony Creek Trail. This was the first leg of the Martin family trip. Dennis Martin's family did an annual Father's Day trip, and this was the first year that 6-year-old was included. His older brother Doug had done the trip, his dad, his grandfather, a number of other members of the family. To my understanding, this segment of the trip was just Clyde, the grandfather, Bill, the father, Doug, and Dennis. Dennis was 4 feet tall, 55 pounds, 6 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, and he was slightly developmentally disabled, but not to any critical extent. He was, by all accounts,
a functional young boy, just a little bit slow. There's really no reason to believe that he would have wandered off for any reason, but on this first day, this first leg, they made the trip from the trailhead up to Russell Field. From Russell Field, they took the next step of the trail out to Spence Field, which is where we're headed right now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get there.
Be getting close to the Russell Creek.
It's been about a mile and a half, I think.
Yeah, we should be getting close to the Russell Field. And then Russell Field will take us about another mile to Spence Field. That's where we'll be able to take a look around, show you guys where the kid actually went missing, kind of give you an idea of why search efforts were so hampered by terrain and weather. And the only reason that a kid would head off into the brush would be if they were scared.
So, due to weather conditions, we're not going to make it all the way to Spence Field today. But what we were able to find is a bush similar to what we would have seen up at Spence.
I mean, it was a bush somewhere on this trail, and the bush itself isn't marked, so...
Yeah, I mean, honestly, us picking a bush was going to be as good as doing this.
Yeah.
The point of the matter is, what happened is that on the second day of this adventure, the Martin family reached Spence Field, where they decided to set up camp, and Bill Martin found some other parents of other children and said, hey, the kids should play together. So while the adults did what the adults had to do, setting up tents and all that, a group of these children went and played hide and seek and, you know, various other campsite games. At one point during these games, Dennis and his older brother Doug popped themselves behind one of these bushes along the edge of a trail. Now, their plan was to scare some family members, adults, as they came up the trail. The adults, of course, not being born yesterday, saw the kids run behind the bush and didn't really have a problem with it. So Dennis's father, Bill, saw him go behind the bush, saw Doug go behind the bush, wasn't super concerned. A lot of versions of the story that you hear are going to say they were playing hide and seek. That does not appear to be the case. It appears to have been specifically that Doug and Dennis were trying to scare their parents.
Right. So their father, Mr. Martin, is back at the campsite. He watches these two signs.
What a fool. Scare them, they did.
Crouch down behind a bush, and they're going to jump out and scare him. But the entire time they're in his line of sight.
Yeah. He had his eyes off of them for maybe a couple of minutes. And when they called everybody in saying, all right, you know, time to end the game, let's come back to the campsite, regroup, you know, dinner, all that. Doug came back. The other kids came back. Dennis did not. Bill thought, you know what? He's probably just continuing the game. We'll give him a couple more minutes.
Maybe he's still trying to scare me.
Exactly. But after a few minutes, he got a little tired of waiting. Went to check on Dennis. Dennis was not behind the bush. So the very first thing that Bill does is shout, I can't find Dennis. Everyone starts looking for him. Adults, older kids, and Bill himself bolts down this trail about 2 miles looking for his son.
So he would have ran right along here on the way down.
Or possibly
one of these trails.
Yeah.
He ran down one of them.
Yeah, it's unclear exactly which trail he ran down, but he ran down the trail.
If you're running down a trail, it would have to be this one, because the others are lateral, so.
Yeah. Now, he did not see Dennis. Nobody coming up the path saw Dennis. And after a few hours of searching the immediate vicinity, they decided to contact the Rangers. Rangers launched a search. This was, again, June 15th. Rangers launched a search.
Right.
What transpired over the next approximately 10 days was one of the largest organized manhunts in a national park. They had over 250 search and rescue volunteers. They actually had to cut off the number of volunteers because they couldn't actually wrangle them together and appoint enough leadership to get these groups to be successful.
There's
so
too many,
they cut off the road that comes up where we parked. They cut that road off. And then they called in the National Guard. They called in Rangers, police, basically anyone they could get their hands on. A couple days in, I believe the 17th or the 18th, the FBI got involved. And on the 17th or the 18th, again, it's one of those 2 days, approximately 24 Green Berets who were training locally were dropping.
Damn, Green Berets?
Prior to
Green Berets?
the Green Berets becoming quite what they are today. Right. Back then, they were a little bit more of guerrilla warfare reconnaissance kind of deal.
Cooler.
So,
guerrilla
warfare.
warfare.
Like, this was their jam. This is what they did. Right. So, called in about 24. And that number over the course of the next few days would increase to over 70. 72 to 74 Green Berets.
So
damn. My boy summoned the army.
The road's cut off. Lord knows how many random people walking through the woods, and 70 Green Berets.
Yep.
all looking for this one kid.
Plot twist. What if one of the random people actually found him, kept him, and
pan and show the people. You know, the brush can get pretty thick around here. Yeah. And where we are.
like, bro. Oh, what was I saying? Yeah, what if plot twist? Like, what if one of the people, the bystanders? I mean, not by, but what if one of the people who are searching for him, like one of the civilians? What if one of them found him, but elected not to tell anybody, and on some weird shit took the body or hid it? I don't know.
But again, we're talking about a 4-foot, 6-foot, right? Body strength to climb these nearly vertical, you know, hillsides. We're looking at 60, 70 degree slopes here. Yeah. He's not going to have the upper body strength to climb up that. So he's going to have to be, you know, basically going down, if anything. They did not find him. Now, what they were able to do was have dogs track his prints, his scent, down to a creek. I don't think it was Anthony Creek. We'll show you
what it is.
You'll see the creek will be somewhere right here, probably.
Right.
They traced him down to the creek, and after the creek, dogs lost his scent. Now, there was a group of Boy Scouts in the area aiding the search. One thing that is important to note about Boy Scouts, they follow the buddy system at all times. You will never have a Boy Scout wandering alone unless they have done something wrong.
They don't just send children out into the woods. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds here.
Yeah.
So, the Boy Scouts are looking around. The dogs trace Martin's scent down to a creek. And what they find in the creek bed is footprints. One bare foot and one shoed foot. The sole imprint matched Dennis's shoes. However, the Rangers said that according to Dennis's father, and there's actually no record of this, they just say in their report.
In the Rangers account.
Yeah, there's no external record of Dennis's father ever saying this. It's just in the Ranger report.
Right.
They say that Bill Martin said that shoe print is too big to be Dennis's.
So, the official account is that the Rangers said the father said it, but you couldn't find anywhere that the father had actually stated that the shoe print was too big.
I could not corroborate the National Park Service's story on that.
And the barefoot shoe print, was it like a child's?
It was definitely child size.
Okay.
But they argued that it looked more like a 10-year-old than a 6-year-old.
Okay.
And they said it was probably just one of the Boy Scouts. Now, here's the problem with that. They had all the Boy Scouts accounted for, and for every Boy Scout, they had 2 shoes.
Right.
There wasn't a single Boy Scout missing a shoe.
It's unlikely one of the boys was out looking barefoot.
Alone, half barefoot, like.
So were the 2 footprints side by side to imply that the barefoot person and the shoed person were walking together?
No, it was 1 foot was bare, 1 foot had shoes.
Oh, now I'm learning. Look at that. Okay.
Now I'm learning.
One set of footprints, 1 with a shoe, 1 not. Right sole pattern to be Dennis Martin's shoes.
Okay. The Rangers report is that the father said the feet were too big.
Yes.
Okay.
They did not pursue the trail across the creek, officially. From the 22nd to the 25th, when the search was suspended, there is no record of what the Green Berets were up to. Their communications channel was completely separate from the National Park Service and the National Guard, which is standard.
Correct.
But,
yeah, the Green Berets do that.
But there's no record.
There's no record of it. Yeah.
For the first 5 days the Green Berets are involved, there's pretty meticulous recording of everything that's going on. And then suddenly, on the 22nd, reporting of the Green Berets activity stops.
And when did the Green Berets actually leave?
The 25th.
So there's a 3-day period of time where the Green Berets were still looking, but
nothing is recorded.
It's not been logged.
One of the theories is that the rest of the searchers were basically told, "Oh, don't worry about the creek. It's a dead end."
It's a dead end. Gotcha.
And the Green Berets kept looking on that other side of the creek. That is again the theory. So the same day that the Green Berets.
Damn.
Oh, I did forget to mention a little tidbit here. It didn't really help with the search because they couldn't find anything. But a man by the name of Tony Stark supplied 2 helicopters to the search team, which I just...
You have to mention that.
You gotta mention. You gotta bring it up.
Iron Man went looking for Dennis Martin.
We had the Green Berets. We had Iron Man.
If anyone was going to find this kid, they would be Iron Man to do it. Yeah. Well, okay, Iron Man too. But the people they had out here would have done it.
Yeah, it would have been the Green Berets.
Especially considering we're talking about a 5-year-old kid in foliage like this, having 5-minute head start.
Yeah.
That all the adults are the search rescue crew. Couldn't find him in how big of an area?
It was, I think, approximately 20 square miles.
Yeah, that's like the next hillside over, the parking lot's over, pretty much the entirety of Cades Cove and the region around it.
And to tie this into another missing 411 case, there is a story, I believe the name is Keith Perkins. I might be mixing up my names here, but I believe it's Keith Perkins,
who was actually younger. He was
Keith.
and in his case, he went missing and showed up 22 hours later, 12 miles away.
Right.
Nobody's sure how he did that, and Les Stroud, Survivor Man, tried to recreate that trek and could not do it in the same time period. So, adults can't cross that distance. Now, apparently, 3-year-old Keith Perkins could, inexplicably, which suggests that perhaps he mentioned a cat. Perhaps he was dragged off by something,
just,
and
carried him 12 miles.
Small child, traumatic experience.
Yeah.
That's basically the only way it could have feasibly happened. But again, a cougar dragging someone 12 miles is still weird.
And then dropping.
So yeah, but the point of the matter is, in brush like this, even adults can't make that
Especially
distance.
the kid was in the line of sight.
Yeah,
right?
if he had gone down the trail, which again, going through the brush here is
hard,
near impossible, especially for someone that small.
Right.
So if he was to escape, he would have been going up or down the trail.
Right.
Nobody on the trail saw him, which
Especially-
means the only option is he went in.
Even if he was to make a break for it, right? The father's seeing the bush over there.
Yeah.
And he's walking towards it. It would have had to be directly away from the family into the thicket. So that leads people to think, well, maybe it was a kidnapper of some kind, right?
Maybe someone took him.
But even then, the child didn't make any noise. People were searching everywhere for him. And then, even if it is one dude who kidnapped this kid, the idea that 250 people and 70 Green Berets, that he was
70 Green
good
Berets
enough
on
to
top of
outtrack
the
them.
250
Yes,
people.
yeah, correct.
Yeah. And then he left no tracks.
Yeah.
That nobody heard him.
Dogs couldn't find.
Yeah, the dogs were able to trace him to a creek, and that was it.
No evidence, yeah.
So there's a couple of stories that spring out of this, because on the 25th, search was suspended.
Right.
They could not find him. There was essentially no chance that after nearly 2 weeks, he was still alive out there.
Right.
So unfortunately, they had to make the very difficult decision to suspend the search and presume him dead.
Right.
For the conspiratorially minded, there are a couple of things that come up here. There's first and foremost that 3 days where the activities of the Green Berets on the ground are not reported.
Right.
So some people suggest that they did think something was over there, and they thought it was something that the public was not in a position to accept, whether that be Bigfoot or feral wild
The
man out
foot
in the
that's
woods,
big.
whatever it was. The idea is that the Green Berets directed everybody away from that area so that they could focus on it and handle whatever was going on in there. We don't have any record of what happened. Obviously, there is no way to corroborate that theory.
Right.
But a lot of people do look at it, and when you think about the way Special Forces operates, it does kind of work.
Right.
What would they have been after? Who knows?
Who knows?
Another thing that comes up is another couple sometime later mentioned that while they were camping nearby, they spotted something strange up on one of these ridge lines. Honestly, considering this was June, I don't know how the hell they saw anything past these ridge
They
lines.
would have to be pretty close.
Yes.
There are a few places through these hills where you can have a sort of embankment where you can look up at a ridgeline, or they could have just been close to the ridgeline.
True.
So it's not impossible, but it would have to be an ideal line of sight.
Yeah, exactly. So what they reported was that they saw what they described as either a large hairy man or a large, unusually hairless bear running on 2 legs, upright, with something slung over its shoulder up a ridgeline.
Neither's a good option.
Neither of these things are good options. And even if you go to something very mundane, like the unlikely event that a cougar came up, snacked on him, and got away without leaving a single trace, that's still awful.
That's still
there's still no good
it's
situation.
Still, the most plausible scenario is still horrifying. The idea that a 5-year-old boy within eyesight of his dad on a very well-hiked and documented trail, that a bear, a cougar, or a person could come up behind him, grab him to where he makes no noise, even with his brother right next to him, as close as we are in the bush together, and that it could drag him away and not be found by a frantic sprinting dad, the entire friends and family who searched over the next days, 250 rangers, 70 Green Beret, whatever it is, can elude all of them and wipe this kid off the face of the earth. Is terrifying. Even without bringing in any conspiracy-esque ideas.
Exactly. You can leave the paranormal completely out of this. You can leave aliens out of it. You can leave Bigfoot out. It's still inexplicable.
Yeah.
And I think that is the core of these Missing 411 type cases. It's not necessarily that there has to be something paranormal going on, but they are completely unexplainable in so many cases. There are some where there is a plausible explanation, but it seems unlikely.
There's a few that you could imagine, maybe if someone wanted this person got, or maybe just random kidnapping, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if this was a random kidnapping of some sort, the things like the dogs not being able to find him, the half-shoed set of footprints through the river.
That's the weirdest one.
And no one being able to, like 70 Green Berets being unable to find a clue about this person except for a supposed 3-day blacked out history report.
It really is. They find those tracks. The Park Service says, nope, can't be him. And then the Green Berets go silent.
Walked into the river and off the face of the earth.
To me, I will be honest, to me, it does sound like they found that shoe mark and the Green Berets went silent. That doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. Again, I don't know. I have no proof of what happened.
Yeah, it's pretty sus.
But that seems odd, in my opinion.
You're thinking the national parks are up to no good?
I mean, that's why I'm here.
Alright, fair
That's
enough.
how we got here.
That's why I'm in the woods with Wendigoon right now in front of a random bush.
That's why I'm here.
Stop that.
To date, Dennis Martin is not the only person to go missing in this park. There have been adults, there's actually been a number of adults. The National Park Service does say that they don't keep a list of people who go missing in the parks, except for the list that they keep of people who go missing in the parks that's published on their website. What they don't do is keep a full comprehensive list.
Right.
They really only keep the
It's
ones
just
that
for
are
active
public.
missing persons and people who be on the lookout for, so to speak.
What they like to do is have a list of the widely known public cases, and then if you call them and say, hey, can we get a list of people who went missing in the national parks, they say, well, that's going to cost you $20,000, and it's going to take us several months to compile. And then when that person puts up the money, you tell them you're never getting that list and hang up the phone. And by you, I mean the National Park Service's lawyers.
It's interesting that's gate kept that much. We're going to get blacklisted from national parks.
Absolutely.
It's going to get to the point where it's like, oh, let's get a map, and they're like, you'll be shot instantly. It's also a known thing, it's just someone who's local to like the Smoky Mountains, that you do not come into these woods alone. Not just like, oh, Bigfoot, UFO like you were talking about. There are things that go bump in the night, most of them natural, at least all the ones we know of are natural. None of them good. None of them something that you want to deal with. Not to mention, as we mentioned earlier, the elements can be very unfriendly out here.
Yes.
You'll get very hot, then very cold. It gets very dark.
As
and
you
very
can
wet.
see,
As you can see,
this is not from rain. This is sweat. And then we stopped for a minute to rest, and I very quickly got very cold.
Yes.
So even though it's probably about 65 degrees right now,
you're cold. You've got a breeze coming down off the mountain. You've got the river right there. And what happens is you get water all over your body, and then as it gets darker, it gets more and more cold like it is. What eventually happens is you're soaked from sweating during the day, and then you're freezing at night, which is not a condition anyone needs to be in, especially several miles out, a hike away from the road. These woods are not kind, even if you do everything correctly. And I think it's a testament that with the case like Dennis Martin, you have all these people out here, everything to prevent something bad from happening in place. And something bad still happens.
The world is cruel.
The world is cruel. The woods are nice, but they're not kind.
He would have been, basically he would have crossed to the eastern side of Eagle Creek.
And been somewhere around Jenkins Trail Ridge in this area.
Covering the camera.
Sorry, somewhere in Jenkins Trail Ridge.
Wherever Dennis
we're
was.
We're still in the search area. This is like the
Dennis's
place,
last suggested location would have been somewhere about 2-3 miles southeast of where we are right now.
That is following the prints.
Yes, that is assuming the prints that are his.
Yeah.
One thing I found odd was there was disagreement over what kind of shoes Dennis was wearing in the reports. One suggested he was wearing loafers, and the other suggested he was wearing tennis shoes. Tennis shoes seemed significantly more likely.
Then why would you wear loafers up here?
Yeah, so I don't know.
Well,
shut up. Pay him back up. This is called drip. It's different.
The point is, that's a weird inconsistency.
Right.
And if they couldn't be sure what kind of shoes he was even wearing, how could they possibly be sure if they were the right size?
Yeah, right.
That seems fishy
Is that
to
what
me.
further makes you discount the idea that the dad was like, these are clearly not his?
Yeah, because like the dad would have been able to.
Yeah, also, why the dad who's like running through these hills freaking out trying to find his son,
be like, nah.
Why would it then, it's like, oh, this is an exact match to your son. And he's like, looks more like a 9-year-old to me.
Yeah, like, no, it just doesn't make any sense.
We should leave this. Come on, guys, let's go back up the hill.
It seems to me like they had a feeling Dennis was on the other side of that creek for some reason or another, and that the only people they could trust to keep whatever they found secret were special forces.
All right, so
it's, again, even if that means it was just a mountain lion that dragged him off.
I'm going to offer a counter theory just
Okay.
so we don't get executed by Park Services. Perhaps with cases like this, say it's national parks, right?
Yeah.
What might have happened is they get to that stage and they see the shoe print. For whatever reason, they think it's not a missing person anymore. They think it's a murder. They think it's a abduction. They think it's something along those lines.
Right.
Something that the national park doesn't want to deal with, right? Because that's police problems. That's like the county.
And the FBI was involved.
Okay, yeah. So what might have happened is they're doing this search, and then they see that, or they find some clue that it was a human abduction, like an adult grabbed them or whatever, and they are like, let's go this way, yeah. Because
let
then,
law enforcement
and
handle it.
I'm not saying that they like hid information.
Yeah.
I'm saying that perhaps they passed the information on to the local authorities, and we're like, you should do an investigation in that direction, because legitimately, not even conspiratorial, that is out of their jurisdiction,
Yeah.
a human kidnapping. So maybe it's just something they wanted to pass off to the police instead of handling
It
themselves.
was within FBI jurisdiction. 'Cause
Correct.
It was on federal land.
That's true.
So, what I'm thinking is they probably did continue searching that side of the creek, and it was probably Special Forces and FBI in tandem.
That's more than likely.
Yeah, that seems like the most rational.
That's also
explanation
more
to
than
me.
likely why the comms dropped for those 3 days. And the FBI is also very bad about, I know from personal experience, very bad about releasing information, especially when it comes to missing persons and murder cases. So perhaps over those 3 days it moved into an FBI jurisdiction, and they just kept it to themselves, which is why the Green Berets records were no longer logged. However, what did they find in those 3 days?
That is the question.
That's the question.
That's what we don't know.
And also,
what we know they didn't find is Dennis Martin.
we know they didn't find his body, because if they would have found his body, that would have been the end of it. If they would have found him, regardless of their, looks, people were still searching, regardless of how much they were looking for him. So the FBI would have been like, here's the body, or we found him alive, or whatever. So we know they didn't get that.
Yeah.
So what was discovered in those 3 days?
And why wasn't it logged? Those are the questions we're not going to get answers to.
Yeah. But this is phase 1.
If you're an FBI whistleblower and you're watching this video,
no.
contact the Lore
I have
Lodge
enough
at
weird
gmail.com.
emails already. Stop. All of the people who are in my emails periodically asking me if I want to do something like rob the Pentagon, email him from now on. I'm tired of
And
these
I will get in
glowies.
touch with Isaiah.
Stop. Don't show my face. Cut this out.
What are the
Don't show my
scenarios
face.
that you think would have been the case for them to, even if
Don't show my face.
to not inform everyone else that they had found him and continue the search? Not necessarily in terms of like letting them keep look because like they need to find him, but more because they don't want anyone else knowing what they found.
Right. I can't think of
So I'm
a
assuming the speculation is the Simpsons did it.
I can't think of a
Green
scenario
Berets.
where the feds found a kid and were like, we'll just keep this to ourselves.
It would have had to be
Unless
something.
the kid some like had like the national treasure
Yeah,
key to him or something. I don't think
I-
there's a way.
Only feasible reason I could see is that it was something so absurdly horrifying for whatever reason that they decided it was best not to inform the public. It is, of course, possible that they privately informed the family of what they found.
That is true. There are some cases where people are found and they just tell the family.
Yeah.
So
It could have been that they found him in such a condition that it would have been upsetting.
So it does go both ways. There are cases where the FBI, Park Service, what have you, will alert the public to a super grisly occurrence. It
In this
could
case,
be
it's a child.
where it was a 5-year-old, a minor, who the family was searching for him, that something was found, and they went and told the family, we found this. That could be what's in the 3-day
Could be what it
report.
is, yeah.
They could have found the body in such a condition. And that would also make sense because it was 1969.
Yep.
It's not like there would have been, television cameras and a big press release. Despite over 300 people being involved in the search,
Yeah, no TikTok, no Twitter.
yeah, they could have just privately went to the family and said, we found the remains, it wasn't good, it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
And the family, maybe some of the people involved know. I do think it'd be weird that 300 people were involved and no one ever had clarity and then spoke about it later. But perhaps in those final days, just the family received their answer and didn't make it publicly known. However, that still asks the question, if he was found dead, something still took him away from the trail and all those people that quickly and that quietly, and
What was it?
what was it? Yeah.
That's the thing about this specific case is every time you answer a question,
There's another
question.
Yeah.
So
if he was not kidnapped, which he still could have been kidnapped, but if he was murdered, if he died of exposure or what have you, something still took him away from everyone that fast. that over 300 people couldn't find him.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, because it's like when you follow the story all the way through to the point where it's like, if they found him and didn't acknowledge it to the general public, if it was a bear or a cougar or something, it's already known that that exists here.
Right.
My head's immediately going to, if the public found out about this, they wouldn't come to the park anymore. What might be that scenario?
Could also be inbred cannibals and the Tennessee Wild Man.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm not sure I believe in the inbred cannibal stuff.
But the Wild Man.
Possible.
This state is full of cannibals, incestuous monster men, and lice. So,
And
don't move
lice.
here. If you're not from the region and you come here, you will die. Every day. Like, I had to kill 3 this morning. They'll try to eat your dog. Don't come. Now, the Dennis Martin case, as with any case of disappearances in Appalachia, of course, has some scary stories attached to it. Those are what we're going to talk about here.
Shortly after Dennis Martin disappeared and after the search had been suspended, a couple reported seeing what they claimed was either a very hairy man or an oddly hairless bear running on 2 legs up a ridge, and slung over that bear man's shoulder was what appeared to be a small child. The police and the park rangers couldn't actually corroborate this report, but it does tie in fairly well to local Appalachian folklore.
See, stories of hairy people or these humanoid figures in the woods kidnapping someone, especially children, is sadly nothing new. Now, while creatures like this have many names in the Appalachian wilderness, one of the most famous, especially for the state of Tennessee, is that of the Tennessee Wild Man. Legends of the Tennessee Wild Man date back to the 1800s, with stories from the Civil War of soldiers coming across this 7 to 9 foot tall hairy beast with deep, piercing red eyes running through the tree line. Early sightings of the wild, early stories of the Wild Man hold everything.
You got this.
Thank you. Early stories of the Wild Man showcase him as everything from a creature that steals the wounded off the battlefield or food from storage houses to something that simply just stands in the tree line, watching for some reason. Accounts of the Wild Man can vary from specifics, like the color of his hair being anything from gray or black to a light blonde or brown. But some of the consistencies throughout the sightings are that he is, of course, very tall, possesses deep red eyes, has a horrific smell as blood or something dead, and lets out these deep, guttural shouts. I'm at my limit. Now, the earliest story that specifically gives an origin to the Tennessee Wild Man comes from the 1870s in McNairy County, in the southwest corner of the state. According to this story, as legend has it, a carnival was making its way through the southern part of Tennessee when one of the members of its freak show act, tall, hairy man, escaped from its enclosure one day and has roamed the countryside ever since.
The story even made its way into the media, with local newspapers discussing a tall, hairy wild man who was out and about looking to kidnap local women. There were legitimate warnings going around all over southern Tennessee, and it seems like they were taken seriously in many cases.
Now, while this account of the Wild Man relegates him to a single individual acting alone, several of the other stories suggest that perhaps there's several wild men out in these hills. Sightings of the Wild Man date as recently as 1995, and as far east as Elizabethton and the North Carolina border.
The most recent account comes from Rob Phillips, and he told the story in 2015 to several media outlets, including a couple of TV channels who were featuring the story. But most importantly, he says that everything took place around 1995, which would explain why there weren't any, cell phone camera videos or GoPro footage of it. But what he described was that he and his cousin, Randy Sparks, were on a hike to a set of cliffs, and what they came across was a nice little rainstorm, the weather getting a little chilly, and it must have been pretty dark because what they said, they started to hear twigs snapping, and then they started to smell something dead, the scent of rotten flesh or old meat, something along those lines. And then they heard something scream, and at this point they booked it. And according to Rob, he actually lost his cousin somewhere in the darkness of this rainstorm in the midst of the woods. And he found himself huddling up against a tree, hoping not to be found by whatever it was that was stalking him through the woods. Unfortunately for him, when he looked at the tree in front of him, about 15 feet away and 20 feet up, what he saw was what by his estimation, was a 7 to 9 foot tall, charcoal gray colored, hairy beast of a man with bright red eyes, fur that he described as neither coarse nor fine, and a pretty horrifying screech. It scared him so much that he just booked it for the car, where he actually was able to rendezvous with his cousin, and they just immediately got out of there.
What's interesting about the Tennessee Wildman is, for one, you're probably thinking to yourself, that sounds a lot like Sasquatch. And yes, that's true. The primary difference between the two, at least through most local accounts, is that while Sasquatch is often described as an ape that has the form of a man, the Tennessee Wildman is more so described as a man who has the form of an ape. What I mean by that is creatures like Sasquatch typically have this connotation in our mind of being a sort of primate-like creature. But sightings of the Tennessee Wildman are very particular in that it has the face and eyes of a human. And what's particularly interesting about the Tennessee Wildman, to anyone who's familiar with folklore of Appalachia, is that while this is one name given to a creature of this description, there are several other creatures who fit this description as well. One of these examples is that of the Flintville Monster, a creature that, according to a woman,
Like how they're talking about this shit while they're camping.
she witnessed running across the field in front of her house up to her front door trying to snatch her young child. The mother quickly barreled out the front door and grabbed her kid before ducking inside, and quickly caught a glimpse of something which she said was covered with black fur, ran like a dog, and had the face of a man. After calling the police canvassed the area, and all that they found were large, humanoid barefoot footprints and blood soaked on the tree line. Again, the Flintville Monster matching this description of the Tennessee Wildman. It seems that, depending on when a creature was found and who attributed a name to it, some of these things are treated as entirely different entities, at least in folklore history. But, as it seems, there's nothing saying the two can't be one and the same, or at least the same kind of creature. Another example of this is a creature known as the White Screamer. According to one account, in the 1920s, a farmer in Middle Tennessee reported that over several nights he heard some kind of screaming or whooping coming from the tree line outside of his property. Night after night, his wife and children would complain that they couldn't sleep because it sounded like whatever this thing was kept getting closer. After a week,
It's getting closer, Georgie.
grabbed a shotgun and decided to chase into the woods after it. However, after following wherever this noise was coming from, it kept getting further away, like it was trying to run from it. The farmer doubled down and began to sprint through the forest, desperate to stop whatever this thing was, kept his family up. What he didn't realize was happening is that this screaming was leading him in a circle, all the way back to his home. And whenever the farmer realized that the screams had turned from the screams of whatever this creature was into the screams of his dying family, it was already too late. He ran into his household to find that his wife and kids had been eviscerated, torn apart, the white walls now stained red across their house from whatever this screamer was. And the farmer said that as he stood there in agony, he looked out the door and saw something he described as an ape with the face of a man running into the hills.
These legends aren't limited to white settlers in the area, though. Back in the times before European colonization of the American continent, the Cherokee had their own stories, something they called the Sulkalu. Now, one of the most prominent versions of this story describes a young woman who needed to get married, but she would only marry a great hunter. It was all her mother would accept. So, one night while she was sleeping in the outhouse, as they called it, not the outhouse you and I might understand, but sort of a cabin outside of the main building, she woke up to find a giant sitting in her room. And the giant was kind, it was friendly, but it was hairy and large, and she was a little bit scared at first, but it promised her that it was a great hunter. And it proved it. And eventually, the young Native American girl decided to get married to the giant. But its appearance was so fearsome that it scared the mother, and the giant's feelings were hurt such that it took his wife and went off into the mountains to live with its own kind, suggesting that the Cherokee natives did believe that there was a race of beings out there who match, to some extent, the description of the Tennessee Wildman.
A large creature, this time sometimes described as carrying a weapon and stealing cattle from local farmers, that picks things up out of the valley, carries them into the hilltops. And honestly, if anyone's familiar with the region, you know that we can go all night. Everything that's named from the Sasquatch and the Tennessee Wildman can also pick up names like that of the Romer, or the, help me out here, there's more.
The Romer.
There's a skunk ape. It smells bad. It's tall, red eyes. That sounds like a skunk ape to me.
Very true. Andre the Giant. I don't know if he smells bad. He seems
Hills with big glowing red out back to their nest and to feed.
which was described as a large, hairy man who carried a
who come out at night to terrorize those of us. And they were offers. They would make contact with one of them, not to fire, but they'll never offer it. Take them into the troll.
Will often offer forever indebts you to the Fae. And that would inhabit this area comes from places like Wales, Ireland, and Scotland, where these legends originate,
so to speak, that already existed. That stalks the rivers and tree line. Now, something that's interesting about legends I grew up with, like that of the Wild Man, is that while in some stories, the creature seems to be this hostile entity, it's not in all of them. Some are much evil as they are forgotten. Now, with the case of Dennis Martin, we're not implying that he was taken by the Tennessee Wildman or the Romer or some form of bipedal primal creature. But what we are saying is that it's not the first time that someone's gone missing in Appalachia, and the stories just kind of seem to write themselves. Details like the couple seeing a hairy man carry him into the tree line, details like the feet that have one shoe and one bare foot, a little too large to be that of Dennis's.
The 3 days of radio silence from the United States Army Special Forces
also doesn't help. All paint the picture of something that people from the region have seen before. And while again, it doesn't necessarily provide an answer to what happened to Dennis Martin, it definitely shows people are desperate for more, and perhaps desperate enough to conjure up their own nightmare.
Regardless of your own beliefs about Dennis Martin, we can all agree it's an example of America's unexplainable. These hills, with their hopes and horrors from generations long since past, seem to come up with their new form of monster every day. And perhaps the most disturbing thing about the Dennis Martin case isn't the unfortunate or unlikely nature of it, but the fact that it will almost definitely happen again. And as nature continues to show us the unexplainable, it's only natural that the people of these mountains will continue to build the legend of America's Boogeyman. But even if you think I'm ridiculous and all this talk of wild men and Dennis Martin is also ridiculous, which it almost certainly is, I'm still glad you're here. If it wasn't for Aiden and Aiden being able to come down, the crew who were dedicated to the project. But I've done enough rambling for now. Again, hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did...
Damn, went again. That was a good vid. I'll leave a link in the description below for the video.
Inside a cardboard box. After 65 years of investigation, the real name of the boy in the box has finally been identified. But this murder mystery, it's far from solved. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. Today I get the feeling, sometimes like with these more brutal ones, it always feels like
this guy Vsauce.
when they happened a longer time ago. 65 years does feel like a longer time, so that always eases it somehow. But still, dude, the title of this episode is just like that. I don't like it. Look, welcome to the show. I'm Simon. I'm your host here. What happens here, if you're new, is one of my writers, in this case Kevin. Thank you, Kevin, has written me a script. I've never read it before. We're going to explore it together, so let's jump in. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the oldest and most famous unsolved crimes in Philadelphia. For the past 65 years, there had been virtually no evidence to go off. But as of December 2022, advances in DNA testing have finally provided a name to America's unknown child, better known as the boy in the box. The discovery. Fox Chase was a neighborhood in Philadelphia. The woods off Susquehanna Road were a popular area for two main reasons. First, it was often used as a dumping ground for trash because apparently common decency hadn't been invented yet. Oh my god, it still hasn't. Sometimes you'll just be like in the nature and someone's just like dumped a mattress at the side of the road because they don't want to pay the like tiny amount of money that when you go to the dump to like dump something legally. And there's this huge fines for this and stuff, but still, because you're just so unlikely to get caught and it just ruins, it's rare, but it still ruins the nature for everybody. The area was also used as a training ground for would-be hunters. People would litter the woods with traps to catch muskrats, a semi-aquatic rodent that can be up to 4 pounds and a little over a foot long. These animals are allegedly tasty, but given their small size, how little their pelts sell for, and how much a muskrat trap costs, it seems to me like it would make more sense just to buy food. I'm not opposed to hunting so long as you use whatever you kill, but laying out some traps, then checking days later to see if you caught anything, doesn't seem to me like it would include a lot of skill, so this particular endeavor just seems a bit pointless. Yeah, I guess so. Unless you're like making the trap yourself. It's like, I use mouse traps to catch little mouse that live in my attic. And I don't get any joy from that. It's like, oh great, dead mice. I'm not eating them, obviously. But it's still like, this is just pointless. It's just someone created a trap, the mice are stupid, they fall for the trap, and that's it.
Well, I mean, somebody could, right?
People are like, oh, you just set them free in the forest. It's like, yo, this is a house I go to like every few weeks. The humane trap version would be the mouse starves to death, which is worse than a quick... Anyway, it was a cold night in February 1957 when one of these wannabe hunters went out to check his traps and stumbled upon a cardboard box. The box was right by a pair of trees, not far off the road. When the hunter looked inside the box and saw the body of a deceased child, he immediately knew what he had to do. Absolutely nothing. What? Okay. If that was me...
Wait.
February 1957, when one of these wannabe hunters went out to check his traps and stumbled upon a cardboard box. The box was right by a pair of trees, not far off the road. When the hunter looked inside the box and saw the body of a deceased child, he immediately knew what he had to do. Absolutely nothing.
What the
Okay.
fuck? What?
If that was me, it'd be like, oh my god, I'd spend about a few seconds getting over the horror, I'd back away from it, and immediately call the police. I'd back away from it, like, so I couldn't see it anymore. I'd just be like, so it's off in the distance, because I don't want to think about that and look at that. I want the police to do their job, and me not have to think about that anymore. After all, if he led police to the location, they may have confiscated his illegal hunting traps.
These are the guys who killed Bambi's mom.
Look. Get your priorities straight, okay? The police, one, if you're worried about them, like, punishing you for the hunting traps or whatever, don't be. Just take the hunting traps away, and the police will be like, what were you doing? It's like, I was doing illegal hunting. They don't give a shit. There's a dead kid in a box. The police wouldn't give a shit in a situation like that. It's like, if they find drugs,
Yeah,
if
that
someone's a witness to a murder, and they happen to have a little bit of, like, coke on them or whatever, the police are gonna be...
That's like being in fucking New York in like 2016, right? And you fucking see somebody getting murdered and you're smoking a joint. And you know, obviously you're not supposed to be smoking a joint. But the cop's like, what were you here doing? And you're just like, oh, shit, I was taking a shit. Like, bro, just tell the truth. You were smoking a joint. He's gonna be like, okay, whatever. What else did you see? He can't arrest you.
You're like, well, thanks for staying around as a witness, and as a reward, we're not going to arrest you for cocaine possession or whatever, right? Surely that's what must happen, because you want to encourage people who are doing something a little bit naughty to report something that's a lot naughty. That makes sense, right? Please tell me that's how police actually operate.
However, you're under arrest for possession of cocaine.
A few days later, a student from LaSalle College stumbled upon the box. In one version of events, he was passing the road and saw a rabbit hop into the underbrush. Knowing about how common it was for people to place animal traps in the area, he went to check on the rabbit to make sure it was okay. Dude, it's a wild rabbit. Okay, it's not someone's dog. The various reports are unclear, but it's likely that the story was a lie that he told himself to make him seem like a sweet and caring guy rather than a disgusting pervert. Oh, okay. The more salacious version of events is that the student was on his way to go spy on nearby residents of the Sisters of Good Shepherd, a Catholic residence for wayward girls. The 1950s term for single mums. He's a peeping Tom. No, I was looking for a rabbit. There was a rabbit and I just had to help it. I definitely wasn't going to perv on the mums. MILF!
Oh,
God, not appropriate. Regardless of why the student was in the area, he saw the cardboard box and the head sticking out of it, but he too chose not to contact the police. What is wrong with people in the past? He at least had a better reason, since this was a known dumping ground. He thought the box just contained a discarded doll, and he didn't bother to investigate further. Okay, fair enough, never mind. In the next day, news broke of the disappearance of a 4-year-old girl named Mary Jane Barker. Fearing what he had originally thought was a doll may have been the missing girl, the student went back to the woods to check on the box. bro, what are you doing? Just phone the police and be like, this is going to sound crazy, and it's probably just a doll. But I was out saving rabbits, and I saw a doll, and then I saw her on the news. I'm just telling you, police, because this is my civic duty.
Yeah, what the fuck?
I am now absolved. That's what you do. Don't go and poke around in the box. I'll be like, oh no.
Yeah, it's some Final
Tell
Destination
the
shit.
police to do their job. This is not my job. I make YouTube videos. Inside the box was not the missing girl, but instead it was the body of a young boy. Now he knew that there was a dead body, he immediately contacted the police. Initial investigation. Because of how cold it had been, it was difficult to determine how long the body had been in the woods. It's known that it was at least a couple of days based on the two people finding it, but from the state of the body, it could have also been anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of months. Initial findings were that the boy had been between 4 and 6 years old, but his age was difficult to determine because of the condition of the body and because he seemed extremely malnourished. The boy was 3.5 feet tall, but weighed only 30 pounds, significantly underweight for his height. There were also indications that he had been severely beaten, and blunt force trauma was ultimately ruled to be the most likely cause of death. I don't get it. It's 4 to 6. I know, I feel like I'm a broken record whenever there are kids in this, but it's like, stop, what? I get upset at my kids all the time. I'll be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like this morning, my kid was just like, I just go away for a second. And the next thing I know, he's climbed up on the dining room table and he's opening and shutting my laptop like this. And I'm like, oh no, stop. Oh God, please. But like anything beyond just a moment of verbal anger and then feeling bad at myself is like, I do not comprehend how it can go beyond anything that. It's a kid. It's a kid. Cough. In contrast to the malnourishment and beatings, it seemed like he may have been generally well cared for. The boy had several scars which would have made the body identifiable. However, many of these appeared to be surgical scars. 3 scars on his chest, groin area, and ankle all seemed to be the result of professional medical care. Well, that would make it seem like it would be very easy to identify who this was, because that's a lot of surgeries for a kid. Of course, it's possible that any medical procedures occurred when the boy was even younger, as there's no telling how long he was in whatever situation ultimately led to his death. There weren't any marks indicating that he had received any vaccinations, which meant that he was not in public school. If he was indeed only 4 years old, then he would have been too young for school and wouldn't have needed to get his shots for a few more months, but it was still noteworthy. Wow, they definitely vaccinated people later in the past. None of my kids are 4 and they've like been shot up with all sorts of vaccinations. We discovered, me and my wife, and by we I mean she did, and then she told me about it. There's a vaccine for chickenpox now. And one of our friends, his kid got it terribly. Like, their face was like super red, so many scabs. It was horrific. I remember having chickenpox as a kid and it being like miserable, but my face wasn't like just entirely red with pox. I'm okay. And then we just like, maybe it was a day later or so, just found out there was a vaccine. You have to pay for it. It wasn't on the health service, but I was like, yeah, for sure. So I took her in, got her vaccinated. Don't have to worry about that anymore. And as soon as the other kids, I think it has to be stop breastfeeding or whatever, before you can have that. And then we're like, we're right on that. I'm like, is this like 100 quid? 150, so like 200 bucks or something? I think it's like 150, 200 bucks, something like that. And I'm like, that is a bargain. Because also, the kid's off school for like 3 weeks with chicken pox, which means me and my wife will have to somehow like take care of them. There's 2 of them now, so that probably means me taking time off work. And my time's quite valuable. So it's like, okay, get that vaccination. I'm like, get them all.
Yeah.
Even though I do agree that children are not horses. The autopsy showed that the boy's feet and one of his palms were wrinkled. This meant that they had been submerged in water immediately after or immediately before he died. His hair and nails were also freshly cut. The hair was so freshly cut that pieces of it could still be found on the body and on the blanket in which he had been wrapped. Unsurprisingly, it was a very poorly done haircut, almost certainly having been hastily performed on the boy after he died. This unusual detail led one investigator to consider the possibility that the boy was being raised as a girl and that the haircut was an attempt to hide this fact from the police. It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? What, like how many children out there are being raised as a different gender? It's a vanishingly small number, surely. In addition to the other images of the boy that were circulated, a police sketch of the boy with long hair and dressed as a girl was also distributed in case this investigator's hunch was correct. As you'll soon see, the police were taking this case extremely seriously. Excellent, because there is a kid who was found in a box. The police took it seriously. Yes, and? One of the first orders of business was for police to take a footprint from the child in the hopes that they could match it to a hospital record. Babies aren't fingerprinted at birth because they are generally uncooperative little shits, but getting a footprint from a newborn is pretty easy. Although police were optimistic that they would find a match, it unfortunately didn't yield any results. Taking footprints at birth didn't become nationwide standard until the 1960s, with the boy likely having been born between 1951 and 1953, so he may have just missed out. Wait, is that still what goes on? Do Americans, do you take footprints at birth? Because identify... That's weird. That definitely doesn't happen here. Beyond the condition of the boy himself, police searched the area for any evidence they could find. At least 250 police academy recruits.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know that.
In the area, but only 3 pieces of potential evidence were found. The first 2 were a child's scarf and a man's white handkerchief with the letter G in the corner, but neither of these clues went anywhere. The other piece of evidence was a man's blue corduroy hat with a leather strap on it. Then, of course, there was the box itself and the blanket the child had been wrapped in. The box still had a label on it, indicating that it originally contained a bassinet sold from a local J.C. Penney. Unfortunately, they were unable to lift any fingerprints off of the box, but at least there was the chance that it wasn't a complete dead end. The J.C. Penney from which the bassinet box originated was able to tell the police that it was one of only 12 of that specific model that had been sold. Unfortunately, there were no records of who had purchased the bassinets. It's not terribly surprising. Yeah, why would there be a record? Like, people weren't using credit cards back in the day, just paying for cash and not like writing down, Mr. Jones bought a bassinet. Be like, no, I just want to go. Just let me pay and leave. The first modern credit card had only been created in 1950. Oh, okay, there were credit cards, never mind. And Visa and MasterCard didn't exist yet. Stores also didn't really begin collecting and selling customer data until the 1980s. Oh god, are they selling customer data? Isn't that illegal? Isn't that what like that GDPR, I mean, at least in Europe, thing was? Isn't that what it is? Like to stop companies being like, oh yeah, we collected all this information on site, we're going to sell it to someone else. You know what, lately, I posted this on my Twitter. Whenever I go to like BBC to read the news, all I'm getting advertised is an F-35. As in the Lockheed Martin F-35, as in like a fighter jet.
Lockheed Martin.
It says like something, it says it in Czech, but it's like, the best defense is a good offense. And it's advertising, and it's like the new F-35.
Fucking A1
like,
Abrams.
Why is this being advertised to me? Why does this advert exist? Who is putting out? Why is Boeing or Lockheed Boeing or whoever it is who makes the F-35? Why are they putting out adverts to consumers in any way? I get why I could be being retargeted for it because I make a channel. I'm sure I've covered and make videos about this, and I look up a lot of defense stuff. But I'm not like the target market for this, really. The target market is not YouTubers, it's countries. It's also like $80 million. So it's a little out of my budget for, plane. It probably costs like $20,000 a second to keep it in the air. So of course all 12 purchases could have been made with cash with no real record of sale other than the inventory numbers. Once details of the bassinet were made public, 8 of the 12 owners came forward to either show that they still had the box or to inform the police that they'd long since thrown it out. As for the blanket, it was a cheap imitation blanket designed to look like it was made by Native Americans. Authorities took it to the Philadelphia Textile Institute, who were able to narrow it down to having made in a factory in either North Carolina or in Quebec. This didn't prove terribly helpful as the factories manufactured and sold these cheap blankets by the thousands. Yeah, it's like, okay, great, you know where the blanket was made. How is that useful? I mean, you just chase down every lead. Is that really a lead? I mean, the blanket's a lead, but where it's made? Oh, I'm sorry, I was assuming it came with the bassinet. But okay, it could have been. Okay, so that, I understand. I'm sorry, I'm being a smooth brain. My bad. So that just brings us back to the hat. The hat had a label inside that read Eagle Hat and Cap Company. This was a small local store in Philadelphia, and the owner immediately recognized that. She had made about a dozen identical hats at some point the previous year, but they did not include a leather strap. The original buyer would come back to have the strap custom added to his hat. She remembered the owner as being a blonde man in his late 20s and said that he resembled the picture of the boy in the box. But once again, there was no name or address associated with the sale, only the store owner's memory. Despite their best efforts, police were unable to track down who this hat had once belonged to. So could this be the father, then? Because he resembles the victim? With the leads from the hard evidence exhausted, all that was left to do was rely on help from the public. In a move that was deemed rather unusual, hundreds of thousands of flyers were made using photos of the boy as he had been found. Normally authorities would prefer to use a photo from when the victim was alive, or at least a sketch when that wasn't possible, but they opted for images of the bruised and deceased child instead. These flyers were sent to other police stations, grocery stores, and insurance agents to be posted. Police even had the Philadelphia Gas Works and Philadelphia Electric Company include the flyers in everyone's bills. Wow, the police are doing a cracking job on this. Because there's a dead kid. Good, I like it, carry on. The boy remained in the morgue while people from as many as 10 different states tried to identify the child. Multiple people attempted to claim the body, but all turned out to be false leads. The most promising identification came from a Marine who had just returned from overseas. He believed that the child may have been one of his 17 brothers and sisters. Oh, dude. And viewing the body confirmed the suspicion in his own mind. Most of the family had moved out west just after he was deployed, but 2 of his younger siblings stayed behind in Philadelphia with an older brother. It was the closest anyone came to claiming the boy, but authorities eventually found the Marine's brother alive and well in California. Nothing was yielding any results. The boy didn't match any descriptions of missing children, the physical evidence had led nowhere, and nobody was able to successfully identify the body. Police even tried dressing the body to make it look more lifelike and taking pictures to circulate on new flyers. They chased down thousands of leads, trying to figure out absolutely anything they could about the unidentified boy, but after months of intense investigation, they knew no more than when they first began. One medical examiner, Remington Bristow, went so far as to make a mask of the boy's face that he would carry in his briefcase as he pursued the case until his death 36 years later. I'm not sure how the mask would be any more useful than the photos, nor do I think I would choose to keep talking to somebody who pulled out such a creepy mask, but Remington desperately wanted answers. He wasn't alone, and over the years, countless people would try their hand at investigating the case on their own. In 1990, the Vidocq Society would be founded in Philadelphia. It's an invite-only organization full of current and former lawyers, FBI agents, homicide detectives, scientists, and forensic experts that specialize in investigating cold cases. These guys have come up before, right? I've definitely heard of them. They solved their first case in 1991, 1 year after being founded, and they have been heavily involved in helping Philadelphia police search for answers in the case of the boy in the box. I think this is such a cool idea, like all these retired dudes who have built up a career's worth of doing it, investigating this sort of thing, and they retire, and when you're in a job, it's always like, you got to do this, you got to do that, crack on with this, crack on with that, and I feel this as well. And sometimes I'll just take a day and I'm just like, cool, I'm just going to work on something different. And the creativeness that comes out and just from taking that slower pace stuff is amazing. And I think when, people like this, when they're not under the pressure of like, get the thing done, solve this next case, they're just like, cool, I'm just going to like spend my time looking into this and trying to figure it out after a career's worth of experience it's such an incredible idea. It's such a great thing to do. And obviously yields results. Apparently not in this case. However, those answers wouldn't come in 1957. 5 months after the boy was found, and after exhausting every lead, it was finally time to give him a proper burial. The detectives working the case took it extremely personally, and were thought to have seen the boy as their own collective adopted son. He was buried in Potter's Field, the city's burial place for unclaimed bodies. Although there were hundreds of bodies buried in the field, seeing as they were unclaimed, often unknown, and being buried using public funds, there wasn't a single headstone. The detectives wanted better for this poor kid, so they personally paid for him to have the only headstone in Potter's Field. The inscription read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy, February the 25th, 1957. The search for DNA evidence. Even after the burial, investigators continued to pursue the case relentlessly. We've already mentioned Remington and his weird mask, and we'll get to some theories later, but for those first few decades, all they had to go on was tips from the public and good old-fashioned police work. Thousands of leads were followed, some better than others, but there didn't seem to be any answers to be found. Then, DNA testing came along. This technology obviously didn't exist in 1957, so authorities hadn't bothered to preserve any samples from the boy. In 1998, the decision was made to exhume the body in the hopes of extracting a DNA sample that could be compared to any current and future DNA profiles that they would collect. Fortunately, detectives that originally worked the case had been so deeply moved by the tragedy that they knew exactly where to dig in the wasteland of otherwise unmarked graves. Can't they... Do you have to dig up the whole thing? Can't you just use like a probe or something? Just get something and be like... drill in through the soil, through the coffin, and then just grab a little tissue sample?
Not this time. This is something NASA expressly rejected.
Do you have to dig up the whole body and stuff? That's so grim. Of course, it had been 41 years since his death. Given the state of decomposition, extracting a usable DNA sample would not be a trivial task. Authorities attempted to obtain DNA from tissue samples, but after a year, they finally admitted that their efforts had been unsuccessful. They would try again in 2000, this time attempting to get... When was this first? 1998? Okay, and then they tried 2 years later in 2000, trying to get DNA from a tooth, their efforts again proving futile, so they tried sending the tooth to a private lab in 2001. This time, the lab was able to build a mitochondrial DNA profile. It's so fascinating. DNA is so fascinating. It's like, yeah, there's different like levels of like decomposition and stuff, because obviously you can get the DNA. It's not that old, but it's just like the amount of skill can be, it just requires like an outside lab or someone with more skill doing that, or a tooth rather than just some, I guess, some old flesh or something. Fascinating. After the boy was exhumed in 1998 so that all those samples could be taken for testing, he was reburied in Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia. This time it was in a real cemetery, and he had been given a new tombstone that read, America's Unknown Child. That year his story was also featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted. The real break finally came when the boy was exhumed again in 2019 to take more samples. DNA testing had already advanced significantly. It was believed that they could build a more complete genetic profile. Why don't you just take, you'd be like, okay, so you know this technology exists. Why not be like, okay, we're just going to take a big, we're going to take a slice of bone, we're going to take a tooth, and we're just going to put it in a freezer. Why not do that? You need to I don't know. Well, I kind of see it like, look, when we're dead, we're all just like flesh and like meat. But it does feel a little bit intense. Do we have to dig up the kid 3 times? While they succeeded and finally had the piece they needed to give the boy his identity back, the final chain of events that would make this possible had already occurred 2 years prior. In 2017, a second cousin, once removed from the boy, was trying to figure out what to buy his girlfriend for Christmas. He decided to get her a home DNA kit from an ancestry website, but the couple broke up before Christmas. Not wanting the kit to go to waste, the young man wound up using her himself. By herself, this would not have been enough. If you've watched our episode on the Golden State Killer, you already know that the big ancestry websites do everything in their power to avoid playing ball with the police. This makes them sound bad, but it would be really bad for business for them. I understand why they don't share. I think, as like a regular ass law-abiding citizen, it would be useful, but I also totally get why they don't, and I think it's, oh god, it's such a, well, I think I probably spent like 25 minutes on a previous episode on the Golden State Killer expounding on this, so I'm just not going to, and we're just going to move on, but obviously it's complicated. But what he's going to do is he's going to upload it to one of these other ones where they do some other stuff, and then they do share it with the police, like it's just accepted. Luckily, the man became really interested in filling out his family tree, so he wound up uploading the information to GED Match. GED Match is a free website that allows users from different genealogy websites to find one another, and it is also a company that will give the police absolutely anything that they ask for. In theory, there have been some restrictions in place on what authorities can access, but in practice it hasn't really played out this way. Anyway, the man found tracing his ancestry back to Italy fascinating, but he also thought that was going to be the end of it. And that's when the police came calling. Okay, maybe not the police, but a forensic genealogist and a cold case liaison called him. She informed the man that his DNA was a match to a cold case and that she needed more DNA samples from his family in order to confirm the identity of the victim. The man's mother agreed to provide her DNA, and things quickly began moving forward. Authorities were able to identify the boy in the box's birth mother. They pulled the family birth records and found 3 birth certificates, 2 for the boy's siblings and 1 for a name they hadn't seen anywhere else. Additional genetic testing was done to confirm that the name of the father listed on the birth certificate was in fact the boy's real father. In November of 2022, Philadelphia police announced that they had discovered the boy in the box's real identity. On December the 8th, they held a press conference in which they revealed his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January the 13th, 1953. Because this was an open investigation, the police did not reveal a whole lot of other information. They declined to give the names of the parents, as Joseph had at least one sibling that's still alive, and they wanted to avoid any undue harassment of those individuals. Excellent. God, the police is so good today. This is, I did another episode like a couple of days ago where it was just like, oh my god, police incompetence followed by police incompetence. And this is so nice to see like really thorough, thoughtful, caring police work. I love it. Unfortunately, the internet's going to internet. With the little information available and Zarelli viewed as an uncommon surname, people immediately got to work trying to identify and dox anyone they thought might have been one of Joseph's relatives. Wow. Do you have to be such pieces of shit? What do they have to do with it? Why would you do this? Why? What is the motivation? There's plenty of shitty people out there that you could do this to if you want to like research and like right where they live. There's loads of pieces of shit. Why do it for the relatives of someone who got murdered decades ago? Why? It should hopefully go without saying, but please don't do that. Despite being cagey about releasing any other information, police felt it was important to release Joseph's name. Even if, can't you just say like, someone Z, like, you know, they do for minors in some countries, where they just say like Mr. P or like Child D, this sort of thing. Even if the picture circulated at the time hadn't helped, they thought perhaps someone who was alive in the area at the time may have remembered the name and could provide information. It may have been 65 years ago, but any neighbors that were in their teens or 20s could potentially be alive and may have information. It might seem unlikely that someone would recognize the name but hadn't recognized seeing the boy, but it was worth a shot at least. Police alluded to the fact that had this technology existed 20 years ago, they may have been able to question or charge the person responsible for the murder. This, yeah, but when was it? 1950? Oh, he was born 53, so let's say, well, he was 4, so 57. Let's say the youngest possible age for the parent could have been, let's just be realistic, or like reasonable and say 20. So that would make them 37, 1937 as a birth date. So they could still be alive, but they'd be very, very old. This potentially indicates that they believe that one of the parents, or both, could now be deceased and that they could be responsible. That's just speculation based on the wording of the press conference, but the parents would also be the first suspects in a case like this. But that brings us to the most important part. Only half of the mystery has been solved. Joseph now has a name, but his killer has remained unidentified for the better part of a century. It's really hard to investigate a murder without knowing the identity of the victim, but now that they have identified him, authorities hope that they can follow up on or corroborate some of the theories that have come to light over the years. Theories. First, we'll quickly mention a couple of theories that gained a lot of attention, but have since been debunked. One was that Joseph was the son of a pair of carnival workers. The carnival workers, Kenneth and Irene Dudley, had been arrested in 1961 because they had a nasty habit of dumping the bodies of their dead children wherever the carnival happened to take them. Well, they seem like very, very good potential options for, well, criminals here. The Dudleys had 10 children, 6 of whom had died of malnutrition and neglect. The children had been wrapped in blankets and dumped in various locations across multiple states, including 2 that were thrown into lakes. It's good that this couple were arrested, but after a thorough examination, it was determined that Joseph was not one of the children. Oh my god, I hope they went to prison for a long time anyway. The next theory, which is most recent, began taking shape in 2013. This one is only partially debunked. The lead originally came from a Philadelphia man who said that his family once rented a place to a man that sold his son. 2 writers, Hoffman and Romano, took an interest in this lead. They presented it to both the Philadelphia Police and the Vidocq Society in 2013. Hoffman and Romano believed that they had identified the family of the man who allegedly sold his son, and they were able to obtain a DNA sample in 2014 that was sent to the Philadelphia Police. The police said they would need to look into it before conducting more DNA tests, and for years, that was the last that anyone heard. The radio silence was deemed suspicious and seemed to give the story more credibility, but in 2017 authorities confirmed that they had compared the DNA samples. They were not a match. This confirmed that the writers had not identified the family of the man who sold his son, but it doesn't mean that the original story never happened. It's odd that a Philadelphia residents would have sat on that potential lead for 55 years without telling anyone, and even odder that someone who rented a room would inform the owner that they were just there to sell their child. But I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it does seem bloody unlikely, doesn't it? What are you doing in town? Oh, I'm just here to sell my children. Good day to you, sir. I'd be much more dismissive of the entire story were it not for one of the other theories. Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah, I just dismissed it because I think it's a bit silly. But maybe there's more to this. Let's find out. The final debunked theory, and the first major theory to catch the public's attention, came from the medical examiner in Remington that we mentioned before. There was a foster home about 1.5 miles from where the body was dumped, so that it was an early lead for investigators. The home was owned by Arthur and Catherine Nicoletti, who lived there with Anna Marie Nagel, Catherine's daughter from the previous marriage, and anywhere from between 5 to 25 foster children. At the time Joseph's body was discovered, there were 8 children living at the foster home. The initial investigation showed that all 8 of those children, and in fact all the children that had passed through the foster home, were accounted for, but Remington didn't want to let it go. Even though the police had closed their investigation into the foster home, Remington became fixated on it. His investigation made little progress, so in 1960 he enlisted the aid of a New Jersey psychic to help him find the truth. He's a medical examiner. I always want to believe that like people who are men of science or women of science are also like less likely to believe all the hokum shit. But it's not always true, is it? I mean, this guy's like, he went to medical school and stuff. He's a scientist, basically. And he's like, yeah, let's just try the psychic. I mean, what have we got to lose? I mean, nothing but, money. They're not doing it for free. And also, you get on wrong tracks instead of doing something useful with your time. The psychic claimed that she could identify a person by holding a metal that was connected to them. So Remington brought her a couple of staples from the box that the boy had been found in. The psychic described a large house with a wooden railing and a log cabin on the property. Remington searched all over Philadelphia for such a house, but see, this is it. He's just wasting his time doing this. But the only one he found that matched the description was the same foster house that he'd been investigating. So did the psychic know about this? Yeah, this was all in the press and stuff, right? This was a big lead for investigators. So the psychic's just doing that thing that all psychics do, where they just cheat, basically.
Now you can call your own personal psychic anytime, 24 hours a day.
He brought the psychic to the location where Joseph's body had been found, and she led him directly to the foster home. This impressive bit of clairvoyance convinced Remington that she was the real deal, especially because she claimed to have never been to Philadelphia before, and psychics would never lie to make themselves more credible, would they? They would, though. They would. That's what they do. Despite living in the Northeast, I had been completely unaware of this up until the first time I drove to Philadelphia. So I don't know where is Philadelphia in the Northeast? So let me help anyone unfamiliar with the area with a little geography. Thank you. I had never actually known where Pennsylvania, the city, was, but you could take a bridge directly from Philadelphia to New Jersey. I know where New Jersey is. That's like down a little bit south from New York, right? It's on the coast. It's where that TV show Jersey Shore happens. I've never seen it, but I've seen the memes. Even if the psychic really had never been there before, which seems unlikely because it's hard to imagine anyone that wouldn't actively try to escape life in New Jersey, steady on, Kevin, she undoubtedly would have at least researched the case to make sure that she could tell Remington what he wanted to hear. But with this new otherworldly evidence on his side, Remington was sure that the foster home was involved in some way. His leading theory was that Joseph was the illegitimate child of Anna Marie, who had died accidentally, and that they discarded the body to prevent her from being outed as a wayward girl. When the Nicolettis got out of foster care business and sold the house, Remington went to their estate sale. There he saw, oh my god, this dude is like... Chill, dude. Just relax. Why are you so into this? There he saw a bassinet that I don't know. I mean, sir, I'm biased because I'm like, if he hadn't done the whole psychic thing and like was just on this side quest as part of a psychic thing, I'd be a lot more like, cool. Good on you for being so dedicated and finding out who killed this boy. But now I'm just like, oh, I've been led down such a path. Although maybe it will accidentally lead him somewhere. Let's find out. There he saw a bassinet that looked like it matched the ones sold by JCPenney, as well as blankets that matched the ones wrapped around Joseph. His suspicions only intensified years later when Catherine passed away and Arthur took Anna Marie, his stepdaughter, as his new wife. Oh my god, you're up to some like Woody Allen shit right there. Dude. This, combined with Arthur's refusal to take a lie detector test, convinced Remington that he was onto something. He passed away in 1993 before learning the truth. In 1998, the new lead detective on the case, Tom Augustine, visited Arthur and Anna Marie to investigate the theory. Though Anna Marie had given birth 4 times, all of the children had died. 3 were stillborn and the 4th died in a freak accident. He had been electrocuted to death by one of those coin-operated carousel rides that you see outside of stores. Oh my god, what? My kid loves riding on those. I know now we're in the future, so, they're probably safer. Oh my god. You see them in America. I don't know if this is some weird cultural thing that Simon is totally unaware of. No, we have those, like, coin-operated things that children ride around with in shopping centers and stuff. Yeah, for sure. Kids love them. I honestly, I'd never even noticed them until I had kids, and now I'm like, look, you're in a shopping center, you're like actively looking out for them. Where are these things? Let's go. Well, let's waste some money. Regardless, Anna Marie had documentation to back up her claims, and the trail once again went cold. Now this brings us to the final theory, one that was brought forward in 2002 when Tom was contacted by a psychiatrist out of Cincinnati. The night before, the psychiatrist had received a phone call from a patient of hers, who the police would only refer to as M. M wanted her doctor to contact the police and tell them that she had information about what happened to Joseph. Since M passed away a couple of years ago without taking her story public, I've opted not to use her real name, as that's clearly not what she wanted. Well done, good stuff. This is what I was talking about. There's no need to like dox people for no reason. Tom, along with 2 retired detectives who were close to the case, traveled to Cincinnati, where M would tell the story of her life and the life of Joseph over the course of a 3-hour interview. According to Em, in 1955, she had accompanied her mother when they picked up Joseph in exchange for an envelope that she assumed contained money. Em was 11 years old at the time and claimed to be the frequent victim of physical and sexual abuse from her mother. The mother had allegedly purchased Joseph, who they named Jonathan, for the same purpose. Joseph was allegedly disabled in some way and was unable to speak. He was kept in the basement where he slept in a cardboard box surrounded by coal bins, used a floor drain as a bathroom, and was never allowed to be seen by guests, and was the victim of the mother's neglect and repeated abuse. Wait, I just went back and had to reread that for a second. She obviously wanted this kid because she went there, picked up the kid, and gave money. So then why would you not care and love for this kid that you... Well, one, it's a kid, and two, you paid for them. You, like, bought them or whatever. I mean, it sounds weird to say, like, bought someone, but, like, some sort of weird pseudo-adoption. Em said that Joseph died after an incident when he was given a bath. He was in the tub and vomited up some baked beans that had been given for dinner. In a fit of rage, Em's mother slammed him on the floor, killing him. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Kevin wrote accident in the bath. It says incident, which makes more sense because that is not an accident. She hastily cut his hair and then forced Em to help her dispose of the body. They drove to Susquehanna Road to dispose of the body and began to remove Joseph from the truck when a potential Good Samaritan drove up. He saw them moving something from the car and acting strangely, so he pulled over and asked if they needed help. So what are you up to? I'm just dumping some, I'm just dumping. I'm just like leaving shit in the woods.
What the fuck?
Good day to you, sir. Em kept her back to him and was ordered to stand in front of the license plate to block it from view, while her mother convinced the man it wasn't a problem. After he drove away, the pair disposed of Joseph's body in the woods. They had wrapped him in a blanket, but as for the bassinet box, that was just a piece of trash that they found that someone else had left at the popular dumping ground. In addition to giving alleged details of Joseph's life and death, Em provided a lot of details about herself and her family as well. She told police that her mother was a librarian and that her father was a science teacher, told them where she grew up, mentioning spending time at summer camp and so on. Virtually every single thing she told the detectives about her life and her parents' lives can be verified as true, except for the potential abuse and the purchase of Joseph. A psychiatrist corroborated Em's story, at least insofar as the fact that Em had first told her all of this information back in 1989. She couldn't prove whether any of Em's allegations were true, but it meant that this wasn't some new story that she had concocted for attention because the murder had been gaining media traction again. Unfortunately, the doctor did not have any notes that verified Em had brought all of this up 13 years earlier. Either they're both lying, or they're both not. So I'm not sure why evidence that they had talked about years earlier was so important to the police, but it was. Yeah, it seems a bit weird. Also, it's 13 years ago. Does psychiatrists keep record that long? I kind of hope not, in like some sort of privacy thing, right? You've got to get rid of it after a while. And also, why would the psychiatrist lie? What's the motivation there? Maybe more information about the case have been released to the public in the time since, but otherwise, I'm unclear why the doctor's notes from 1989 mattered. Regardless, Tom said that it was the best lead they had ever had in the case. Everything Em said about the case lined up, and her story contained a lot of details that were not public information at the time. The haircut and fingernails were widely known, but the fact that he had been submerged in water at the time of his death and that the autopsy discovered baked beans in his stomach were not. Wow, that is really compelling stuff, isn't it? Although this was a really long time ago, so it's always possible that that information is leaked. Like, the longer it becomes from an event and the more people who knew about it, so count the number of people who knew about the baked beans in the stomach, which is probably a good number of police officers, and over time that information just becomes more likely to be explicitly made publicly available. As far as I can tell, the witness testimony from the Good Samaritan was also not publicized, and Em's account matched his almost identically. The only difference in his testimony was that he thought it was a mother and her teenage son. Em's back was to him, and she was tall and had broad shoulders, and she was bundled up in winter clothing. It would have been easy for him to mistakenly believe she was a boy. Despite Tom believing that it was their best lead ever in the case, police quickly dismissed the story when it came to light that Em had a history of mental illness. Unfortunately, we have no idea what that actually means. Society's attitude toward mental illness has improved, but 20 years ago it was not great. A history of mental illness in 2002 could have easily been something like anxiety, depression, or PTSD. If her story about being sexually abused for her entire childhood was true, then yes, she would of course have PTSD or some other psychological trauma for which she would have sought treatment. While I can't say for certain what M was suffering from, whatever it was doesn't seem to have been debilitating. She completed high school, an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, and a PhD without taking any breaks, and had a long and highly successful career. With no records of M being institutionalized and no breaks in her education or employment, it seems most likely that whatever mental issues she was suffering from were most likely the same types of issues that most adults deal with at some point. She was just punished with incredulity for having the sense to seek help at a time when it was less socially acceptable to do so. Yeah, it's really nice how far. I still don't think it's come nearly far enough, but I think society's come a long way in the handling of mental issues in the last 20 years. I think we're finally moving to a place where we see them as similar to physical issues, and that you can get help for the, something going wrong in your brain the same way you'll go to the doctor for something wrong with your leg or whatever, which I think is really great. Still a long way to go, but a lot of progress has been made. That said, we don't know what happens in the sessions between M and her psychiatrist. It's possible that everything M said is absolutely true. It's also possible that the psychiatrist worked with memory regression therapy and inadvertently created false repressed memories in an attempt to help M. Yeah, maybe. Seems unlikely. Also, she knew the specific details about the baked beans and stuff. We have no way to know, but now that new life has been breathed into the case, perhaps police will investigate her story a little more seriously this time. Wrap up. After 65 years, Joseph Augustus Sorelli has his name again, and perhaps he will finally receive a headstone that reflects his true identity. But this was still only half of the mystery. We now know who Joseph is, but we still don't know why he died or at whose hands. Philadelphia's oldest unsolved murder case remains open, but we can remain hopeful that Joseph's identity was the missing piece in proving what happened to him. Since it remains the best theory available, maybe investigators will be able to link the Sorellis to M's family and find evidence that her account, which they already deemed plausible, was in fact accurate. Yeah, I say this is a really solid lead. Go for it, guys. Or maybe it will show that her story was entirely fabricated and that the guilty party was someone else entirely. Only time will tell. For now, let's just remain hopeful that modern DNA technology will prevent anyone from needing to be buried without a name. But yeah, but that's not true. People, there's unknown dead people all the time. And maybe we'll get there someday with DNA technology, but there would also be like a pretty 1984 future where everyone's DNA's on file and everything like that, right? I don't know. Either way, it's grim, isn't it? It's just death, isn't it? And the next time you get dumped, remember that there's no need to be sad, because in a roundabout way, you may be helping to bring one of America's most famous cold cases to a close. And this has been an episode of The Casual Criminals. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed this show, why not leave it a review? Oh, that's if you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, this also goes out as a video, so you can see me while I read it. What fun! And also, Jen, the wonderful editor for this, adds some images and stuff to enhance it. So if you're listening, why not give it a watch? And if you're watching, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the marathon, but before we do that,
be sure to stick around because there's going to be an exclusive clip from next week's season premiere.
This week on the season premiere of BuzzFeed Unsolved, we covered the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, a prominent figure in the Teamsters Union, and also the mob.
Big name.
Yeah, everyone knows Jimmy. I don't think a lot of people know what happened to Jimmy, but they know of Jimmy.
Well, I don't think many people know what happened to him.
Nobody knows what happened to Jimmy. Technically, he disappeared.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
That's the show.
Why we're in the office, right?
Well, why don't we learn about it?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
James Riddle Hoffa served as the International Brotherhood of Teamsters president from 1958 to 1971. The Teamsters were originally known as a labor union for drivers. At age 18, Hoffa succeeded in getting dock workers better pay by organizing a strike. He began organizing for the Teamsters a year later and gradually rose through the ranks. Hoffa's influence as president of the Teamsters in the U.S. was significant. At the time, 90% of U.S. transportation was controlled by the Teamsters, who were controlled by Hoffa. In 1941, Hoffa and the Teamsters were engaged in a turf battle with rivals in Detroit. It's here, according to author and reporter Dan Moldea, that Hoffa got involved with the mob. Hoffa hired the mob to get rid of these rivals in the city, and although this worked, after this, the Mafia essentially owned Hoffa.
This is not a good outlook or probably a good stance to have. The mob seems very handy. You just give them some money.
Okay, see, this is where you're starting to fall into the trap of the mob.
I know. That's why I have a hard stance, like I'm never gonna work with the mob, ever. So if you're
wow, how noble of
in
you.
the
I
mob
don't know.
out there,
You're such
not
a
gonna do it.
hero.
Because it seems so convenient.
No, it doesn't.
It does.
No one's thinking in their normal life like, oh, if only I had the mob to fucking clean this house.
Right.
Like, what?
Someone's giving you trouble?
What Herculean task have you encountered that you're like, man, I really wish I could use the Mafia right now?
I mean, I have my old couch still. I could call the mob to take my old couch.
That would be the dumbest reason to be indebted to the mob that I could ever
I'll tell them
think
it's dirty. Oh, this couch, it's
And now
gotta
you're
go.
dirty.
It's gotta go.
And now you're dirty.
Whatever. What are they gonna have me do?
Anything. That's how the mob works. You know, I think.
But then I do one favor for them and I'm clean.
No,
I
that's
paid them off.
No, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
The mob and Hoffa formed a symbiotic relationship. The mob was able to benefit from taking loans out of the Teamsters pension fund, funneling these funds into the financing of many Las Vegas casinos. Hoffa and the Teamsters in turn got a favorable return on these loans. Despite Hoffa's connections to the mob, he was beloved by union workers, as he was known for increasing benefits and wages for workers. Hoffa had a stable relationship with the mob in the 1940s and 1950s, but this began to splinter after he went to prison. Hoffa started serving a 13-year sentence behind bars in 1967 for crimes including bribery, jury tampering, and mail fraud. Then, in 1971, President Richard Nixon pardoned Hoffa with the promise that Hoffa would abstain from any union involvement until 1980. This pardon would oddly set into motion events that would lead to Hoffa's downfall. 4 years later, in early July, federal investigators found that the Teamsters' largest pension fund had been robbed of hundreds of millions of dollars, and only 2 weeks later, Hoffa vanished. The timing of these two occurrences seems to suggest more than a coincidence. With the discovery of hundreds of millions of dollars going missing from the Teamsters pension fund, and Hoffa barred from the Teamsters and free from jail, it stands to reason that Hoffa could have made it known to investigators that the Mafia was involved with the Teamsters pension funds. Obviously, the Mafia would not want this to happen. As such, let's examine Hoffa's disappearance. On July 30th, 1975, 62-year-old Hoffa was seen outside a Detroit area restaurant called the Matches Red Fox. According to notes written by Hoffa to his family, Hoffa was asked to meet two acquaintances at 2 p.m. at this restaurant. The acquaintances were suspects Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, both members of the Mafia. Provenzano was also a Teamster. However, neither Giacalone nor Provenzano showed up to the meeting, and they both insisted that there had been no meeting organized when questioned by the FBI. Giacalone and Provenzano technically have alibis the day of Hoffa's disappearance. Giacalone was at the Southfield Athletic Club, noticeably chatting up people he knew and didn't know. Investigators suspected this behavior as Giacalone trying to solidify an alibi. Provenzano was in New Jersey, not Michigan, with his brother Salvatore Sammy Pro Provenzano all afternoon playing cards in a union hall.
So they both
rock solid. Huh?
Almost too rock solid though, and that's what investigators noted. Because it was like, look at me, I'm over here talking to people. Hey, how's it going?
This is where I am.
Yeah, look at me, I'm definitely not murdering somebody right now.
It's 3:16 p.m. on this date, and I'm here talking to you.
It's me, Tony Pro. Note the time, note the time.
Let's take a photo with today's newspaper.
Yeah, here's a big clock.
After Giacalone and Provenzano didn't show, Hoffa called his wife Josephine around 2:30 p.m. from a nearby hardware store payphone to tell her what had happened. There were 5 witnesses who told investigators that they saw Hoffa in the restaurant parking lot, looking like he was waiting for someone that afternoon, as Hoffa was fairly famous and recognizable at the time. Additional witnesses said that a burgundy Mercury Marquis with 3 men inside picked up Hoffa in the parking lot. It stands to reason that Hoffa entering that car was the last time he was seen alive. The following morning, on July 31st, 1975, Hoffa's car was found in the restaurant parking lot.
Obviously, I wouldn't want to be kidnapped and murdered or mysteriously vanished from the earth. It's kind of neat to have people talk about your last known whereabouts, though.
Yeah, yeah. Like he's like, oh, I saw Shane at the D&B. He was playing
Dave and Buster's?
Yeah, he was playing Flamin' Finger, and then some men came over, grabbed him by the arm.
He got on a Mercury Marquis.
Yeah, he got into a Mercury Marquis, yelling, "I still have tickets."
I haven't cashed out yet, bro. I'm gonna buy some disappearing ink.
Witness statements that Hoffa entered a burgundy Mercury Marquis with 3 men seems to be corroborated by DNA evidence from years later. A hair found in the car was confirmed to belong to Hoffa. Therefore, it's plausible, if not likely, that this is the car that transported Hoffa to the secondary location where he was killed. Witnesses stated that the driver of the car looked to be a man named Charles Chucky O'Brien, who was known to be like a surrogate son and protege to Hoffa.
The thing to look at is Hoffa probably would not put himself into a dangerous situation unless there were people in the car that he trusted.
Yeah.
And this guy was one of them. So I think that's the key to any good ploy, right? You got to get someone that someone trusts. So like, if someone were going to whack me, and I saw you in the car, I'd go, well, obviously everything's okay. Shane's in the car.
Come on in. We're just going around the block. Come on in, Ryan.
Oh, Jesus.
Come on in.
Okay, I'm never getting into a car with you
Get in
ever
the car.
again.
O'Brien always denied that Hoffa entered that car and any involvement with Hoffa's disappearance. However, O'Brien was scrutinized by investigators after Hoffa's disappearance, with some maintaining that O'Brien's relationship with Hoffa had suffered after O'Brien felt that Hoffa should have gotten him better positions in the Teamsters.
I mean, I know how those guys operate. They just kind of cross their arms and didn't happen.
It's good De Niro face. Didn't it?
Hoffa's daughter has said that O'Brien, quote, was driving the car the day my father disappeared in the vicinity of the Red Fox, end quote, and reasoned that, quote, if my dad's hair was in the car, he was there, end quote. Investigators also noticed the car was recently cleaned. O'Brien said he was using the car to run errands, like transporting a 40-pound package of salmon from Detroit at Teamster headquarters to a union official's house. He said that the salmon had spilled blood in the back seat, so he needed to get it cleaned.
What?
German Shepherds also found Hoffa's scent in both the back seat and the trunk. Hoffa's son has said that when he asked O'Brien if he was involved in his father's disappearance, O'Brien quickly fled the room.
Good poker face.
Totally not sus at all.
See you later.
Searches for Hoffa included both literal searches in the area and searches through phone and other records, but unfortunately, Hoffa's body was never found. Before we get into the theories, one thing seems to be generally agreed upon, that Hoffa, in some way, was killed by the Mafia. The Hoffax Memo, a document written in January 1976 by federal investigators, indicates that authorities suspected that the Mafia, concerned that Hoffa would make it known they had infiltrated the Teamsters and accessed its pension fund to pay for its illegal operations, decided to kill him. As for the question of why Hoffa would divulge information to investigators, one book on the case, I Heard You Paint Houses, suggests that the Mafia was concerned that Hoffa, who was anxious to get back into union leadership, would be willing to swap information with the authorities to lift his 1980 restriction on union activity that Nixon ordered. Hoffa was also apparently vocal about trying to get the mob out of the union and the union's pension fund. Even still, despite knowing that someone in the mob likely killed Hoffa, investigators could never figure out who it actually was. 4 months into the investigation, Ralph Picardo, an inmate in New Jersey, claimed that he had information obtained while one of Hoffa's killers visited him in prison. Picardo's information allowed the investigators to form their list of suspects, most of which were connected to Provenzano, one of the men that Hoffa was supposed to meet the day he disappeared. However, all of the suspects eventually took the fifth and didn't testify, which dashed any hope of an indictment and led to an essential cold case. And with that, let's get into the theories. One theory is that Hoffa was killed by Salvatore Bergoglio at Roland McMaster's horse farm in Milford Township. McMaster was an enforcer for the Teamsters. This theory is supported by the Hoffa Wars author Dan Moldea, who interviewed Salvatore Bergoglio before Bergoglio was killed. In 2006, the FBI searched for Hoffa at the horse farm to no avail. However, Moldea believes that Bergoglio killed Hoffa at the farm and that his body was then put in a 55-gallon drum and sent to a mafia-controlled landfill in New Jersey in a Gateway transportation truck. The trucking company's president was a Teamster pension fund trustee.
This is why the mafia works, I gotta be honest, because you've got an entire network of people who are there to assist you and provide alibis and make things happen in covert ways.
Obviously, they're doing deeds of evil,
For sure.
but you can say that you could admire the commitment to unity.
Yeah. I mean, don't kill people.
Don't kill
I think
people.
we've said that on this show before. I'd like to say it again. Don't murder.
But you could admire the sense of family.
Yeah. Familia.
Vin Diesel, Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
They're all criminals in
They
that,
got
in that
it.
movie, by the way. But
They stole DVD players.
By the
They
way.
should rot in prison for the rest of their lives.
They're straight up murking people on the streets in those movies.
Were they?
Yeah, they're like running people over in cars, causing millions of dollars of property damage, but you can ride with me any day. Pass me a Corona.
The second theory is that Tony Provenzano ordered the hit on Hoffa. Federal investigators theorize Provenzano organized the hit because of conflict between Hoffa and Provenzano that occurred while they were imprisoned together in Pennsylvania. Their conflict grew to the point where the two despised each other. According to Hoffa's son, Tony Provenzano, as Hoffa's enemy, was thought to have been influencing Frank Fitzsimmons, who was Hoffa's successor in the Teamsters. In 1974, Hoffa said that Provenzano had threatened to kidnap his loved ones or pull his guts out if he tried to become president of the Teamsters again, as their mutual contempt increased.
I'm gonna pull your guts out. Is that good?
That's pretty good.
That's probably exactly.
I don't even
how-
know what you say to someone when they say,
I'm gonna pull your guts out.
Yeah, that's pretty.
I love it.
It's incredibly vivid.
I'm gonna start using that around the office.
Yeah, that's
You cutting that coffee line again? I'm gonna pull your guts out.
Jesus Christ. All right, I guess I'll go to the other coffee machine.
Yeah, that's good.
Holy shit.
I'm gonna pull your guts out.
Don't talk to Shane in the morning.
Also, that's Groot. Like, if you kill someone, great. You just give him a little stab.
He's
whatever.
disemboweling somebody.
Yeah, he's like.
Small intestine, liver. He's just throwing. Oh, he's eating it
He's
now
eating
too.
it like spaghetti. I
He's
don't
like
know.
one of the Walking
Hey,
Dead
have
zombies.
fun.
All right, yeah, whatever.
The third theory is that Richard Kuklinski, aka the Iceman, killed Hoffa. Kuklinski was a hitman and serial killer who was interviewed for hundreds of hours by author Philip Carlo while Kuklinski was in prison. During the interviews, Kuklinski, who has since died, claimed to have been paid $40,000 to kill Hoffa by the mob. He explained that, at the ultimate orders of powerful mob figure Russell Buffalino, he drove to Detroit with 4 other mob members, most likely Tony Provenzano, Gabriel and Salvatore Bergoglio, and Thomas Andretta, and picked up Hoffa at a suburban restaurant. They then knocked Hoffa out, stabbed him with a hunting knife in the skull, and transported the body to New Jersey in a car trunk that was later crushed and sold as scrap metal. Kuklinski said, quote, "He's part of a car somewhere in Japan right now," end quote. Patrick Kane, a police officer who was part of the effort to put Kuklinski behind bars, believes that Kuklinski is telling the truth. However, others dismiss Kuklinski's claims, saying that he was a gross liar and exaggerator. Robert Garrity, crime expert and former FBI agent, has called this claim, quote, "the most embarrassing one to date," end quote. I don't know why I feel like it's more despicable for someone to brag that they killed more than they actually did. I feel it's just another level of this man being a terrible person. I don't think he was actually the killer. I think he just wants people to think he's the killer. It seems consistent with his character.
Yeah, he's a balloonster.
But he does want us to believe that he's part of a car in Japan right now.
Yeah, so you got taken to a compactor or something like the end of a Brave Little Toaster.
That's a deep cut.
Whatever.
The fourth theory is that mob killer Frank Sheeran, aka the Irishman, killed Hoffa on orders from Russell Buffalino. Sheeran spent some of his last weeks interviewing and possibly confessing with author Charles Brandt. Ironically, Hoffa was the one to originally hire Sheeran to be a killer, as Hoffa is said to have used Sheeran to get rid of his rivals and secure his leadership in the Teamsters. Sheeran claims that after they picked up Hoffa at the restaurant, they drove Hoffa to an empty home where he shot Hoffa in the back of the head as he walked inside. Sheeran then left as the body was taken to a funeral home controlled by the mob where it was cremated. Sheeran apparently felt very guilty for betraying Hoffa, but did so because he would also be killed if he refused. Sheeran says that he purposefully sat in the front passenger seat of the car to send a secret warning to Hoffa. Hoffa always sat in the front passenger seat, so Sheeran hoped that Hoffa would notice there was something amiss with the gathering. Hoffa's son reportedly said that he believed his father would have entered the car with Sheeran inside, and that he wouldn't have done that if it had been other suspects. Furthermore, according to the FBI, Sheeran was in the Detroit area when Hoffa vanished. Sheeran even named a house where the murder took place, but attempts to locate Hoffa's blood evidence led nowhere. According to reporter David Ashenfelter, it's possible Sheeran is telling the truth, but there isn't really any evidence apart from his word. It's possible that Sheeran may have wanted to clear his guilty conscience before dying, especially with his strong Catholic faith.
I don't understand why a man who is close to Hoffa, who is a hitman, would say these things unless he did them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it doesn't seem like this guy's out for fame.
Especially if he feels guilty about it.
He feels guilty, right?
You're not going to be like, let me spin a funny yarn about how awful I feel inside.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's like an odd thing to fib about.
No, it's weird. There's not a lot of, I don't see a lot of motive behind that.
No.
Where this theory gets interesting is the possible involvement of Russell Bufalino, who Sheeran claims co-ordered the hit. A PBS investigation into Hoffa and taped conversations with President Nixon revealed that Hoffa's successor and mafia member Frank Fitzsimmons worked with President Nixon to pardon Hoffa and get Hoffa out of prison. But also, they suggest that Fitzsimmons played a role in the union ban on Hoffa until 1980. The tapes indicate that Fitzsimmons wanted Hoffa out of prison so he could keep control of the Teamsters that supported Hoffa. However, Fitzsimmons didn't want Hoffa to be able to seize power, hence the restriction. On Nixon's side, Nixon thought that pardoning Hoffa would endear him to workers because, as Attorney General John Mitchell said in the tapes, quote, "He's just a tough, beer-drinking, no-good son of a bitch like most of them are," end quote.
I do like that. I trust a guy like that.
So basically, this is now entering into collusion between the President of the United States and the mob.
Yeah.
The President wants to get on the good side of the working class, and the mob wants to get Hoffa out so they could be on the good side of the union, but they don't want him to seize power in the union, so they get Nixon to put this ban on him.
The President and the mob, that sounds a little far-fetched, Ryan.
Well, it's on tape.
That's crazy.
Documents at Wayne State University's Ruther Labor Library revealed that members of the Provenzano mob group sent a representative to Vegas to deliver $500,000 to Charles Colson, special counsel to Nixon. The documents go on to show that more money from the mob was sent to Nixon for the restricted Hoffa pardon, nearly $1 million in total. This was around the time of the Watergate scandal, and according to a Department of Justice memo, this money could have been used to try to cover up Watergate, though the mob payments to Nixon were never confirmed.
So the mafia just purchased the President of the United States for $1 million.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
The documents suggest that Hoffa could have been suspicious of this. It's theoretically possible he could have been preparing to go public with the information that the mob paid off President Nixon. This would have made Russell Bufalino, one of the most powerful figures in the American mob, very nervous. Additionally, in 1975, Time magazine published an article that linked Bufalino to the CIA via mafia and CIA goings-on in Cuba. According to journalist Matt Birkbeck, this destroyed Bufalino's carefully protected secrecy, and after its publication, Bufalino was determined to silence anyone who would shed more light on his activity. He got wind that Hoffa and some other mobsters, including Sam Momo Giancana and John Roselli, were going to meet with the Church Committee, which was looking into the CIA and its activity in Cuba. And sure enough, Giancana, Roselli, and Hoffa were all killed in various ways after Bufalino heard about their plans.
Seems kind of cut and dry there, but you know, I guess.
Do we know how those other two were disappeared?
I'm sure they were whacked in various ways.
Such a, God, I I'm just wrapped up in how sad it would be to get murdered by the mob.
Yeah, because there's nothing you can really do.
No. They probably lure you into a false sense of security, too.
Yeah.
Oh, we're just going to go pick up some salmon or something, and then...
Yeah.
The fifth and final theory I'll explain today is that Hoffa is still alive. I would imagine this is mainly theorized due to the fact that Hoffa's body was never found. One bleak version of this theory suggests that not only is Hoffa alive, but he's still in custody of the mob. Another happier version of this theory suggests that Hoffa ran off with a go-go dancer to South America. Either way, in 1982, Hoffa was officially declared dead.
I just want to know where the go-go dancer came from. Did someone see a man who looked like him with a go-go dancer?
Probably a place that holds go-go dancers to do go-go dancing.
What?
Well, he probably went to a go-go dancing facility.
Yeah.
And then met this go-go dancer and was like, do you want to go to... So, why are we going into the details of this?
Because you just said one sentence, you were like, people think he's with a go-go dancer in South America.
It's an internet theory.
There's nothing else to that?
This is a product of the boards. I don't know.
Oh, you gotta get off those boards.
Doesn't even have a board.
As of 2015, the case wasn't closed, but it was considered inactive. Thousands of tips have been examined by investigators, the vast majority of which have led nowhere. Barbara Krancer, Hoffa's daughter, has said that she doubts the case will ever be solved, considering most of the suspects are now dead. Investigators tend to agree with this sentiment.
Guess the lesson learned is don't get involved with the mob.
Well, you've grown.
I've grown.
Because in the beginning of the episode, you said...
At the start of this story, I was ready to call him up and have him just do all my
move your
tasks.
couch out of your apartment, stuff like that.
But now I've
Little
learned a
favor.
thing or two. I don't want to end up rolled up in a carpet.
Yeah.
Being dumped in the Pine Barrens. So, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to walk into your apartment and see a bunch of just plastic sheeting laid out on the ground.
Oh, that's never good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know you're about to be whacked.
Yeah.
Before you know it, the last thing you see is the inside of a trunk, taken to a secondary location. People are calling you, looking for where you are. 10 years later, two assholes sit in a room talking about the disappearance of you, and little do they know, maybe you were with a go-go dancer in South America. I don't know.
Perhaps one day, a new break in the case will shed some light on what happened that one afternoon in Michigan. But for now, the case remains unsolved.
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we discussed the bizarre collar bomb incident. Though some of the culprits in this one have seemingly been identified, the details in this one remain murky.
We sort of toil in murk, don't we?
I would say so. But like I said, we do know some of the main players, or at least we think we do. But then we don't, but then we do. I guess you'll have to stick around to find out.
Okay. I'm in.
On August 28, 2003, a phone call is made during lunchtime rush to Mamma Mia's Pizza, located at 5154 Peach Street. Tony Ditmo, the owner of Mamma Mia's, takes an order for 2 large sausage and pepperoni pizzas. Tony cannot understand the customer telling him the address, so he hands the phone over to his employee, Brian Wells. Wells is about 5 feet 3 inches, age 46, and balding on top. Wells takes down the address, 8631 Peach Street, and heads out south on Peach Street for what seems to be an ordinary delivery. And yet, roughly 2 hours later, Brian Wells is on live TV for robbing a bank. He is handcuffed and surrounded by state troopers in the parking lot of Eyeglass World with a bomb strapped to his neck. Wells tells the police that the bomb was fastened to him by a group of black men who ordered him to rob a bank. After about 30 minutes of gently trying to communicate his plight, Wells says to the police, quote, "Why is it nobody's trying to come get this thing off me? I don't have a lot of time. It's gonna go off. I'm not lying. Did you call my boss?" End quote. At about 3:18 p.m., the caller starts emitting a loud and rapid beeping noise, and then the bomb detonates, and Wells falls backwards, slowly dying, while medics and police are baffled in the background. Wells dies on the pavement. 2 minutes later, the bomb squad finally arrives.
You know, this is why I take issue anytime anyone, some trivial thing goes wrong in their day and they say,
That's true.
FML, bro. Look what happened to this man in 2 hours.
Yeah.
He woke up that day just going to sling some za. You know?
Yeah. He was a za slinger.
Yeah.
And he got a little bit more than he thought he was going to get out
One
of the...
false move, suddenly his life is in tatters. That's horrible. We take so much for granted.
We do take so much for granted.
Let's appreciate each day. You never know when things are going to go south.
Like getting a bomb strapped to your neck.
Right?
Collar bombs have only been known to be used by Colombian drug lords in turf wars, making the use of one in Erie.
In America?
In 1957, the body of a young...
Oh, wait, what?
...receive a headstone that reflects his true identity. But this was still only half of the mystery. We now know who Joseph is, but we still don't know why he...
Oh, whatever.
Philadelphia's oldest...
Well, that's it for now, chat.
But we can remain hopeful that Joseph...